probably about 3 hours by the time it's all over, to join us to learn some of the basics about city government and learn a little bit about your organization, the League of Cities. And so before we get into the hardcore nuts and bolts, it looks like based on the poll results that most of you are council members. It's about 65% are council. Commissioners, about 15%. We have 8% are mayors. And then the remainder are appointed non-elected city officials as well. So looks like we're council heavy, and that's not unusual. Um, so that's the most common form of city government in Kentucky. So we will concentrate on that, and we can stop sharing that poll result if you want to. Whoever, guess I could do that, couldn't I? Oh, I hadn't shared it. There, there's a result for
Yeah,
that.
it came up the first time.
Oh, it did. Okay. All right. I want to tell you before we get into the nuts and bolts, just a little bit about your organization, and I mean that when I say it's your organization. The Kentucky League of Cities is not my organization. It's not anybody you're going to hear from tonight. We're just fortunate enough to work here for a little while. Our League of Cities is one of the biggest League of Cities in the country. We're about the fourth or fifth largest behind Florida and some other states. So it's an active, large league that plays a pretty crucial role in the formation of public policy in Kentucky, as well as the membership benefits that it offers. I hope tonight is the first night of a long lasting partnership. We know you're all cities well, the staff here at the league, and we look forward to working with all of you all in your capacity. We're not new at this. We've been around since 1927, so we're over 90 years old, and we started out. 12 cities came together, formed the organization back in 1927 to lobby on behalf of cities because the legislature would steamroll city governments. DC would roll out uh, federal laws that impacted your all's ability to govern locally. Since that time, the organization has expanded to provide insurance coverage, financial services, IT support services, education and training, which are here tonight, community development, all of those programs that you think of generally with a trade association. The league provides, all designed to benefit you. We do work for you. Uh, the proof of that is who runs the organization, and that's governed by elected officials, just like you all. Some of you on here are on the board. I know Mayor Hamburg's on here. He's their second vice president from the city of Southgate. Uh, Mayor Perkins, Council Member Perkins is on here. He served on our executive board for a long time. And so we're governed by elected city officials, mayors, council members, commissioners throughout the state. We have 4 officers, a 17-member executive board of city officials, some appointed city officials, and a huge 65-member board of directors that determines their positions on policy and advocacy items, both in the legislative and the legal arena. And it is a big board, but that ensures every geographic region of the state is represented, every size of city, every form of government. And that really goes a long way to helping us form a unified front when we do take policy positions to advocate on your behalf. We don't take lightly the fact that you made a decision during probably one of the most challenging times to step up and be a public servant. And the mission of this organization is to serve those of you that have chosen this role of being a public servant. And that really is the mission of our organization. We want to provide resources, advice, counsel. We want to be your advocate, your defender, give you the information that you need to make informed decisions. If you need us to do that, whether that's legal advice or legislative advocacy or just data in order to make decisions about what other cities are doing or comparative analysis. Our research department does that. You'll find that foundational to every part of our organization, whether it's legislative advocacy or answering legal questions or financial services, and even insuring your city against the claims that you're no doubt will have as a city government when you're sued. We focus, and our foundational mission is to the belief that local decisions are best made at the local level. We think that you all are elected and entrusted to those positions to make the decisions in the best interest of your community, and our goal is to protect and defend that in everything that we do. It governs how we operate as an organization. So with that, I do have more interesting folks with me here tonight to talk a little bit about the league in more detail. First, let me introduce our Deputy Executive Director, Doug Goforth, and he's been with us almost 20 years, and he oversees the accounting and insurance functions of the organization. He's going to talk to you tonight a little bit about insurance and our financial services. Doug?
Thank you, JD. And it's good to see all of you this evening, and I'll echo the congratulations on being elected. I can say our entire team here at KLC is looking forward to working with each of you. And what we found over the years is that cities work better together. And I'm going to give you a couple of examples of that as I talk about the insurance and finance programs. In the mid-1980s, the traditional insurance market basically walked away from writing municipal risk. And because of that, KLC, as well as several of our member cities, got together and formed an insurance program to make sure that they could have coverage for what they do every day. And that has been a success story. Today, that program, it started with about 13 members and has grown to over 500 members, has about $6 billion in covered property values, and protects over 15,000 city employees. And the program is designed, and we call it, it is a program. It's not just an insurance company. This is a member-owned program that has policies designed just for what your city does every day. And so, and it's more than just the policies. You'll often see information come out about like sidewalk safety programs, safety grants. We have one for workers' comp and one for liability. We have 4 firearm simulators that in the current environment are even more important in that they not only teach officers how to shoot, but they teach them how not to shoot, how to deal with diminished capacity, and actually go through training about why they took certain actions. We think it's invaluable that officers are able to go through that type of training before they have to face a split-second decision on the street. So with that, I also want to go over we're only a phone call away, and it doesn't matter even if it's in the middle, and we've had this happen, a cyber attack in the middle of a UK basketball game. We're going to stop what we're doing and answer the call. So our health insurance program is a fully insured program through Anthem. The last 2 years, the annual renewal increase, and it's hard to not get an increase in health sometimes, but was 2%. And so there's a little over 200 groups participating in those programs. And we'd like to think we were just a little bit ahead of the curve in that out in front of the pandemic, in that we have a program that, our product that's a telemedicine product that's Healthiest You, that's included with all of the, for every policyholder in their families, so that they can call 24/7, 365 days a year and get hold of a doctor, and there's no copay that goes along with that. So it's been, I think we're the highest utilizer for their company out of all their clients. So the finance programs, what was another program that started out of necessity, and over that there have been over the life of the program over $1.6 billion in city projects have been funded through the finance program. That program currently has a AA- rating, which only 10 cities in the state have a higher individual rating than that. And that rating allows for the opportunity to have lower interest rates. And I'll just go ahead and tell you, when they spotlighted me, that really kind of caught me off guard. So apologize for that. But over the last 2 years, because of the low interest rate environment as well, our finance team has been able to save Kentucky cities over $7.5 million on refinancing opportunities. So not trying to go and do a sales job on this for the products, but many of your cities, actually most of you on this call, actually utilize these services already. And just want you to be aware of them. And we're definitely there to help. What JD mentioned earlier, that the board members are a board of elected and appointed officials. The same thing is true on the insurance, health insurance, and finance boards as well. And we have staff all around the state that help service this, from Hazard to Hopkinsville, from Corbin to Taylor Mill, and all areas in between. So these programs are really created to be there whenever you all needed them. And like I said, our entire staff is excited to get to work with you and help you move the city forward. So you all have a great evening, and thank you.
Thank you, Doug. And I'll also introduce Terry Johnson. She is their member relations manager for KLC. She'll talk to you a little bit about some of the membership, other membership opportunities in addition to the ones Doug mentioned.
Good evening. Thanks, JD. And hi, everybody. It's great to see some familiar faces and so many new faces. We look forward to getting to know you, as JD and Doug have said. I'm going to do a share screen here. So let me pull that up real quickly and just go through some of our programs that are part of your membership. We're here for you, as Doug and JD have both already said. Everything we do is based on your need and created with you in mind. So we like to say, we always say, that we want KLC to be the first call for any city official, because we probably have the answer. You'll learn as JD and Morgan give their presentation in a few minutes, that we have real experts on our staff and a very deep bench. So we want to be your first call, and we hope that's the case. Jumping right into some of the services, you're participating in one right now. That's training and education. Obviously, this year we've done a whole lot of virtual training. In fact, our team did 40 virtual trainings between March and June out of necessity, because our members needed information about COVID and all that entailed. So, they are very nimble and they get a lot done. We like to do in-person trainings and look forward to the days that we can get back to those, hopefully sooner than later. We do a lot of those. We do dozens and dozens of trainings a year, and we also do big conferences. We've had conferences, of course, in Owensboro and in Northern Kentucky. And in fact, those of you from Northern Kentucky, our conference next year will be in Northern Kentucky. So that will be in September, and you'll be getting a lot of information about that. Our conference is a great event. Last year, we had almost 800 people. Great resources, great networking. This year, of course, it was virtual, but we look forward to seeing everybody in Northern Kentucky next year. We do summits on specific topics, things like alcoholic beverage control, code enforcement. This photo over here is of our safety conference, and that's done through Doug's team. This is a conference developed just for your frontline safety workers. So again, the content we designed just for you, and you really won't get the kind of training anywhere else that KLC can provide for you. Looking forward to next month, we have a much more intensive continuation of what you're going to learn tonight, and that'll be our City Officials Academy. It will be virtual, but that is a 2.5-day session that will just give you a lot of really important information as a new or current city official. So there's information about that at the top of our website at klc.org. Moving on to community and economic development. This is a long-standing service, the community development, and the economic development is really an emerging service. We're very excited about that because city officials tell us constantly that that's an area that they want to learn more about. So we have a really dynamic duo of Tad Long and Bobby Bryant, who are very experienced in this area. They can help you with local economic development. They can also assist with other things like city project management. If you have something that you want to get started or you want to get finished or whatever the case may be, they can help you with that. They do community strategic and business planning. They can help you with an important hire in your city, with consultation, coaching, onboarding, that sort of thing. And they can also help you with those very important meetings. JD's going to talk later about big, meetings in cities, and, they can help you do some of those big, really important meetings that may be prickly or may not, but they can also help you with staff meetings. So that's just something to keep in mind with that team. And again, all these things on the screen here I'm showing you are part of your membership. Moving along in the member and business relations team, there are so many different things that I could go over with you that I just want to mention a couple. At klc.org, there are 2 tabs in particular at the top. If you go and look at the drop downs, one is member services, and it lists several things, including several special programs that we have for our members. I'll give you an example of one, IT in a Box. What that is a whole suite of services, and it's just what you would think it is. It's around IT services, website development, cybersecurity, document management, all those sorts of things. So that is a special program because we have partnered with experts in those fields to provide you with those services. So under member services, there are a whole lot of things that you can take a look at, but that's an example of one. If you move over on klc.org on the more tab, you'll see, again, several drop downs. I'll just point out a few to you. We have a place where your city can post jobs. We have a place where your city can post RFPs and RFQs. We have a page that lists grants, and it's updated every week. And we have an awards program that is very exciting for us. We love to recognize you, and we love to celebrate cities. So every year we recognize a city official of the year, a city employee of the year, and a city government of the year. And a lot of those people in recent years have been from Northern Kentucky. I'll just sort of throw that out there. Then I also want to just mention a couple of things that we're doing that are new projects. We are looking at really trying to meet your needs sort of, day to day, but also big picture. I know, JD and Doug were in contact with a lot of city officials over the last few months, and in their conversations, homelessness kept coming up as an issue. So we are putting together some resources around that, and you'll be seeing that roll out very soon. That will probably lead to education, and so that will be more of a long-term issue. But I just wanted to point out that, if there are specific things that you want us to look at, that's what we're here to do. So let us know, and that's an example of that. We also like to connect you with each other. You're doing that tonight. We have other programs that are specifically designed to do that for mayors. We have a city officials list, or excuse me, a city attorney's listserv. We have just a number of different things too that are coming down the pike that will be really unique ways for you to connect with each other. So in closing, I'll just reiterate what Doug and JD have already said. We insure more municipalities than all other carriers combined. That's a super important member service, our insurance. If you don't already know it, you will quickly learn that KLC is the strongest voice in Frankfort for cities, and one of the strongest voices, if not the strongest voice in Frankfort. So, cities are very fortunate to have our legislative team working for you. More than half of all cities have used KLC Finance, as Doug mentioned, and JD and Morgan will certainly demonstrate very soon why our municipal law team is the go-to for city officials for municipal questions. We have a personnel branch through our municipal law team. They get thousands of inquiries a year, email, call, and they are absolutely the most knowledgeable people in Kentucky about municipal law. So again, we hope that you'll join us at the City Officials Academy next month. We're on social media. Please check us out and join us there. Here are our phone numbers. If you don't already have them, you can jot them down. Our website, that's my email, and that's my cell phone. So feel free to give me a call if there's ever anything I can do for you. I'm the member relations person, and I'm very glad to be such. So thanks again for joining us tonight, and I'll turn it back to JD.
Thank you, Terry. Appreciate that. And at the risk of sounding too commercial-like again, Terry mentioned their City Officials Academy. That just goes into more detail with more issues than what you're going to hear tonight. But one of the benefits of coming to that is, if you haven't seen this yet, this is a 2019. Let me see if I can get that right. You can see how thick it is too. This is all the laws I think you're probably going to encounter at some point, written in summary form. But this is called the City Officials Legal Handbook. The attendees to the City Officials Academy get that for free. This is authored by their municipal law department, and the 2021 edition's coming out pretty soon. So stay tuned for that. A lot of, I think, council members carry that and commissioners carry that into their meetings. All right, so we're going to get down to business. If I can figure out how to share my screen appropriately. Is that up and running? All right, I see some heads nodding. Yes. Again, this is a thumbnail sketch of things that you're probably going to want to know before you take office. Let me see if I can get my ugly face off the screen. And now, there we go. First thing we ought to talk about is the oath of office. We've gotten a lot of inquiries about that this year, and Kentucky law addresses that topic pretty extensively and doesn't leave a lot of room for interpretation. The law is clear that you have to take the oath of office on or before January 1. So anytime between the time that the County Board of Elections certifies the fact that you're the winner and January 1, you can take the oath of office. You just have to take it sometime prior to the end of the day on January 1st, the day your term of office begins, at least one time then. Because if you fail to do that without reasonable excuse like illness or impossibility in taking the oath, it could result in the forfeiture of the office. So taking the oath before entry into the duties is essential. And that ultimately is your responsibility, not your city's responsibility. Now, most city governments host some ceremony or host an opportunity to do that where you may get your oath, but you as an individual should ensure that that's done prior to January 1. You can go to any judge, district, circuit, court, court of appeals, Supreme Court, federal judge. If you know a federal judge, any notary public, the judge executive, the mayor is authorized to swear in members of the legislative body. Any magistrate, circuit court clerk, those are the individuals who are authorized to administer the oath of office to city officials. I don't know if I mentioned members of the General Assembly. If you know somebody that can officiate, serve as your officiant to do that, you need to ensure it's done prior to January 1. Your city may host a ceremony. You can wait till then. The good news is if you want to get someone you know to administer the oath, you can take that oath of office as many times as you want to, as long as you do it once prior to January 1. And all those officiants know their proper oath. It's the oath you've heard before about swearing that you haven't fought any duels. And if you like doing that, you can get up every morning and do it every single day. Just be sure you do it on or before January 1. In addition, we just got an opinion from the Attorney General's office. Attorney General Cameron was kind enough to back up our legal interpretation with a little extra security that you can take the oath of office virtually. You need not appear in person if you're hunkered down due to the pandemic. You can get a notary or judge, get them on a FaceTime call or a Zoom call or whatever other virtual source you want to in order to take the oath of office. You don't have to personally appear in order to do that. So that's the quick summary of the oath of office. I hope that's pretty clear. Does anybody have any questions about that? That's the very first item of business that you need to be concerned with. If you haven't, I'm sure about half of you or better have probably already taken the oath. I know I've seen emails and text and social media posts from several cities that they've done that, or certain city officials that they've done that. So if there are any questions, you are free to unmute. I'm happy to answer questions as we go along. You can unmute and ask a question, or you can use that chat feature and type it in, and we'll watch for any questions. But does anybody have any questions about the oath?
Chad Finkenbeiner here from Orchard Grass Hills. Just a very quick question. Would you happen to have the citation for that? Our council was just talking and said that we were going to do it at our first meeting in January. Mm-hmm. And I think I need to bring this up.
Morgan, it's KRS 61 something. We'll type that in the chat.
I really appreciate it.
The oath of office is Section 228 of the Kentucky Constitution, but this law that I just talked about is Morgan will type that number into the chat. It's either 61020 perhaps. Morgan, tell me if I'm right.
61 is close enough. I'll find it from there.
I think it's 61020.
I think you're right. I think 61020 is the one that talks about doing it on January 1st.
Okay.
I think I need to email the mayor and the council like right now during this meeting, because I think we got a bad plan.
Well, now, Chad, you can go out and get your own note and let the other council members know. You can go out and get your own notary. You can go out and get your own judge, get that oath of office, and do it again together ceremonially. A lot of cities do that, where there's a ceremonial effort just to show cohesiveness and unity with the council or the commission. And that's why I kind of joked, you can do it as many times as you want to, as long as you do it once. And it's really incumbent upon you to ensure that it's done. But if you have fellow commissioners or council members who think that January 20th or later in January is sufficient to comply with that statute, that they can wait to take the oath then. Your term of office begins January 1, and that law clearly requires you to take the oath of office prior to into the entry of the duties of the office.
No, that's great. Thank you very much.
JD, I think we had a moment of dyslexia. It's 62010.
Oh, all right. Thank you, Morgan. I used to know all those statutes off the top of my head. So did you hear that, Chad? 62010.
Yes, I did.
Thanks, Morgan. All right, if there's no more questions about,
Can I interrupt for a minute?
Pardon?
Yes, this is Pamela Bushelman. I'm with PDS.
Yes.
We get a lot of I guess maybe this isn't for planning commission or board members, but will this apply to like boards of adjustment members or planning commissioners that may change in the middle of the year?
No, that statute applies to elected city officials.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to clarify. Thank you.
No problem. Those individuals do have to take the oath of office and should take the oath of office prior to taking their seat on the board or planning commission board, but there's not a date requirement with regard to them on beginning a term of office in state statute at all. So that statute just applies to elected city officials. All right. We'll go on generally to this general description, and everybody knows I could spend a long time talking about home rule, but I do think it's important for you to understand that so much of what you're going to be able to do as an elected city official and what your city as a whole is going to be able to do for the constituents that you serve really is based on the relationship with the city government and the federal government, the city government and state government. And you all probably all recall in your civics class learning about the supremacy clause that the laws of the U.S. Constitution and the laws enacted by Congress pursuant to the Constitution are the supreme law of the land. Likewise, you got the same concept that applies here in Kentucky. The Kentucky Constitution and the laws enacted by our legislature, the General Assembly, are the supreme law of the Commonwealth. And that means that cities can't act in a way that deviates from any of those laws. You can't change federal or state law through the enactment of a local ordinance or local rule, and you can't take any act in conflict. Under the federal Constitution, you probably remember hearing a little bit about the 10th Amendment. And the 10th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution says that Congress and the federal government only has such powers that are enumerated or necessarily implied to the federal government. The rest are reserved to the state. We have a similar type of concept in Kentucky, which is kind of the crown jewel of all municipal law. It's called home rule. And some of you probably haven't heard of that term before, but you're going to get very familiar with it. Likewise, in Kentucky, by virtue of legislation, city governments have the ability to make decisions locally without looking for specific authorization from the legislature to do so. We are subordinate units of government to the state, obviously, but city governments prior to 1980, before they could act, they had to be sure that the state legislature had granted them the authority to act in a certain area. So if you wanted to enact a leash law or a smoking ban or a sidewalk ordinance or any of the myriad of things that you all may address locally, you had to thumb through the volumes of the Kentucky Revised Statutes and make sure that the General Assembly said it was okay for you to do that or address that topic area. In 1980, the legislature granted cities home rule, which is just the opposite. The rule now is that you may act in any area in furtherance of a public purpose as long as that action does not conflict with the state constitution or any state statutes. And the General Assembly has given that authority. They can take it away, and they take it away sometimes or try to take it away bit by bit. There are statutes that do prohibit you from enacting certain types of ordinances. A common example we get calls on is the utilization of cell phones while driving, moving motor violations. Cities can't regulate seed propagation. fertilizer, there's some preemption for that. You can't enact an ordinance that interferes with the mother's right to breastfeed in public. There are about 20 or 25 areas where you've been told no, but that's what you got to look for now. Not do we have permission to do it, but whether or not you've been prohibited from doing it. And that is a really important concept that embraces the idea that local leaders are in the best position to make local rules. And we protect and defend that home rule right, as I mentioned earlier in the introduction. The other bullet point here I want to mention to you, sometimes you interact with county officials or others, or maybe under the misperception yourself, that county government has some superiority in the hierarchical chain to city governments. City governments are not subordinate units of government to counties. They're co-equal units of local government, both created by the General Assembly. The judge executive and magistrates and others can't tell you what to do. They can't enact laws to say our city and our county has to do this or that. They don't have governing authority over cities like the state does over both cities and counties. So as my 5-year-old tells her sister almost daily that she's not the boss of her, county governments are not the boss of cities. And that's an easy way to remember that. One general rule there, you may remember that county ordinances have application throughout the entire area of the county, even inside of city limits, unless the city has an ordinance that addresses the same or similar subject matter and imposes the same or more stringent standards. That would mean, for example, if Kenton County, there's a lot of Kenton County cities here, if they enacted a leash law ordinance countywide for your pets, then it would apply even within the corporate limits of those 19 cities there in Kenton County as well, unless that particular city, your city, had an ordinance that addresses the same subject matter and impose the same or more stringent standards. But what the county can't do is enact a county ordinance that instructs the city to perform a certain task or govern itself in a certain way. So that's the best thing to remember with regard to that county relationship. And then the last bullet point bears mentioning because even though it's almost out of the vocabulary, 5 years ago, the General Assembly got rid, a little more than 5 years ago, of those old city classifications that call second-class cities, third-class cities, fourth-class cities. Besides Louisville, all cities in Kentucky are considered cities of the home rule class. The idea behind that is that each city should have the same tools, the same opportunities to govern their constituency, not based on some arbitrary population ranges in a very old constitution. We got that modernized and did away with the classification system altogether. Now, there are a few vestiges that still harken back to the old classification system, and the main one is you'll learn is the ability to impose a restaurant tax. I know Commissioner Glenn's on here. It's something that Owensboro would like to do, or at least to have the option to do, to consider it. But only the old fourth and fifth class cities can do that. There are very few of those left. We've slowly been eradicating those, but just so you know, you're not a third or fourth or fifth class city anymore. You're all a city of the home rule class. That'll move us on to the next section unless there's any questions. And I'm not good at seeing the chat, so if somebody sees something in chat. All right.
There's no question. Just a few comments.
All right, we'll move on to the real guts. You probably want to know what you can and can't do, and what your city can and can't do in particular. And that really is primarily based on the form of government under which your city is organized. There are several options here in Kentucky for the organization of city governments. They're listed on this slide. And again, we'll send you a copy of this presentation if we haven't done so already. But the most common form in Kentucky is a mayor-council plan of government. By far, most Kentucky cities of the 416 are organized under that mayor-council plan of government. Second most common, I know there are several of you here tonight that are organized under the commission plan of government. The third most common, there are 19 cities in Kentucky that are organized under that city manager plan of government. I know Owensboro's on here, that's organized under the manager plan. There may be a few others as well. We also have the ability consolidated local governments. There are really only one city's organized that way or ever be organized that way. That's up Louisville Metro government with a merged city county government. We have one urban county government. We'll probably only ever have one urban county government because of the way those statutes are crafted, and that's Lexington. And then these bottom three, let me take out mayor alderman form of government. That would be available for a city of the first class, the city with the largest population in a county containing over 250,000. We're a long way from probably any city ever being able to use that plan of government, if they would want to even. I doubt that they would, but it's there and it's available. That's what used to govern Louisville before it merged in 2003. And the other two, I don't want to spend any detailed time on: charter county government and unified local government. I put them on here just because if you're new, you need to understand there are options out there for merging city and county government. And quite frequently, as new officials come in and others want to talk about efficiencies, sometimes you get starry-eyed judge executives and magistrates who want to talk about that, or commissioners and council members. There's two ways that you can merge your city and county government or study a merger for your city and county government. That's a charter county government and unified local government. And so if you don't remember anything else from this slide, other than what your form of government is, on the charter county and unified local government, is if you are going to have any discussions with merging city and county government, go ahead and make a commitment right now to run. Don't just walk. Run away when the judge and the magistrates tell you they want to explore forming a charter county government. The reason for that is that the process effectively allows for a county takeover of the city. The county controls the entire process. On the other hand, the proper context to have a discussion for merger of city and county government is the unified local government statutes. That gives the city and county both equal representation in the study commission in order to, that way you don't have one county taking over the cities or otherwise, and gives you equal representation and a much safer space to have the discussion about whether merger of city and county government's the right option for your community. So if you have any more questions about that, we got handouts and other details, but just remember, if you're looking at merger, don't do the charter county government statutes. Let's talk a little bit about the mayor council plan of government. We'll use that as a point of comparison for the commission and manager plan and talk specifically about them. The mayor council plans probably will make the most sense to you. And I know the vast majority of you on here tonight are organized under this plan of government. Your city is. If you don't know, you need to find out. If you're a council member, you're under this plan. If you're a commissioner, you're probably under the commission plan unless you're from Owensboro. And I'm trying to see whether there's any other. Covington may be on here tonight, Newport. Those are city manager cities. If you're a commissioner, if you don't know. But the mayor council form of government's the easiest one to understand because it looks so much like what you studied in grade school and middle school and high school, and remembering the three branches of government. There is a separation of powers in this mayor council form of government that does not exist in the other forms of government. Executive power is held and exercised by the mayor. The mayor functions essentially as the CEO of the city in this form of government. And the legislative power is held by the city council. So legislative actions flow through the city council. And as you'll see, it's pretty important, even though you have these distinct roles and responsibilities, it's pretty important that the mayor and the council work effectively together in order for the city to function properly. There's a natural tension built in between the legislative and executive powers. You've probably seen that play out. You will see it play out in January with our governor and the General Assembly. Likewise, sometimes the council and mayor, because they have distinct roles and responsibilities, that tension's built in to the governmental structure. But in order for the mayor to be an effective CEO, he or she needs to have a good relationship with the legislative body. And in order for the legislative body to accomplish their policy objectives, they need to have a good and try to have a cooperative working relationship and dialogue with the legislative body. And you'll see how that plays off one another when we talk about these individual roles and responsibilities here on this slide. In the mayor council plan, the mayor is responsible for appointing, supervising, disciplining, and terminating city non-elected officers and employees. Appoint, supervise, discipline, and terminate non-elected officers and employees. Well, there's two categories of individuals or employees here. Non-elected officers, let's define that first. And the distinction is important. Non-elected officers, who may include, anybody have any idea who the non-elected officers in the city are? It'd be your city clerk.
City clerk and
Engineer.
Engineer could be. State law requires that you consider the city clerk, the police chief, the fire chief, if it's not a volunteer fire chief, a city administrator, if you had one, and then the city manager form of government, the city manager. Those 5 positions all automatically under state law are considered non-elected city offices. The city could designate, the council by ordinance could designate other positions like the city engineer, as you just mentioned there, city attorney in some cities, city finance, chief financial officer. In some cities, the council's enacted an ordinance to make them non-elected officer positions. And the reason it's important to distinguish those positions from employee positions is the mayor does have the authority to appoint, supervise, discipline, and terminate, but when it comes to time to appoint an individual to fill a non-elected officer position, the council has to go and get the mayor has to go and get the approval of the council. So a lot like what we saw with the Supreme Court nominee just recently, the president picked their justice who they'd like to be a justice, and the Senate has to confirm. Same type of rule here. Mayor picks somebody that they want, but the council has to approve that appointment or confirm their appointment to the non-elected officer position. So there's a little different for an employee. So you got the clerk. If the mayor wants somebody to serve as clerk, they have to get the council to consent to it. Otherwise, that person cannot serve as clerk. Deputy clerk, which is not a non-elected office, if I can not mix up negatives here, it's not a non-elected office. The mayor would just be able to appoint if that position of employment existed. And then this power of appointment, supervision, discipline, and termination, especially when it comes to discipline and termination for police and fire employees, gets a little more complex because there's some state statutes, one commonly referred to as the Police Officer Bill of Rights, that require certain procedural requirements and protections for police and fire employees that they got enacted into law years and years ago that kind of dictate how that works. It may require a hearing and other things of that nature. So once the mayor does appoint a non-elected officer, though, a clerk, a police chief, if he or she wants to discipline or terminate them, they do not have to go. The mayor would not have to go back to the council. That council involvement in that process is only limited to the initial approval or confirmation that they would be able to fill that role. The mayor is also responsible for the preparation, presentation, and administration of the city's budget. 3 verbs in that sentence: prepare, present, and administer. There's one word missing that's pretty important in all of this. Anybody know what that would be?
Approve.
Approve, enact, adopt. So the mayor is responsible for, in the mayor council form of government, preparing a proposed budget, making a proposal, presenting it to the council about what he or she thinks that budget ordinance ought to look like. But then it goes to the council, and the council can change it, amend it, do whatever it wants to. Final approval and policy making for appropriations and the adoption of the budget is a council function. Now, generally, there's a lot of deference to the mayor as the CEO on what they present, a lot like you see with the governor and the General Assembly. Generally, the General Assembly defers when the governor presents his or her budget to what the governor said that he needs or she needs from an operational perspective. But the council could do what the General Assembly did about 8 years ago and just toss it in the trash and start from scratch. Ultimately, that's a council function. But once the council enacts it, adopts it, and approves it, then it goes back to the mayor under this form of government to administer that. So if the council put $100,000 in the budget to make repairs at City Hall, the mayor then can do this third bullet point, which is to make and execute written obligations on behalf of the city to administer that budget. They can decide in accordance with procurement laws that we're going to talk about, decide who's going to be hired to do that, enter into a contract with them, and spend the money in accordance with that which has been approved in the council in the budget ordinance. So preparation, presentation, and administration of the budget is an executive function, and the mayor has that responsibility under the mayor council plan. Do we have any questions on that first slide in terms of the division? Maybe easier to answer them before we go along.
JD, where does the ABC administrator fall into that category?
The ABC administrator, it's not automatically a non-elected city office. The statute permits you to hire one. They still have to take the oath of office, like your police officer or other individuals. You can assign that position of ABC officer if you're controlling alcoholic beverages to any existing office. You can assign it by ordinance to the mayor. You can assign it to the clerk. You can assign it to the treasurer, the police chief, or others, but it's not automatically considered a non-elected office. Now, Mayor, you probably have a few cities out there where it stands alone, and you just hire an ABC administrator, and by ordinance, you may have designated it on its own as a non-elected office, and that would be up to the city to do that.
Would that be up to the council to say it's a non-elected office?
We'd have to do that by ordinance.
And what if it was a police officer that was being appointed to do that job? Not the police chief, but a police officer, then they would have to be approved by the council.
Yes, if they had made it a non-elected office, yeah. Only if they had made the position a non-elected office.
So only if they make it a non-elected office. So if we have nothing on the books for making it a non-elected office, then one could just be appointed.
That would be up to the mayor.
Okay, thank you.
The mayor's in mayor council form of government also has the ability to approve or veto city ordinances. That does not exist in the other forms of government. Very simply, the mayor gets to approve an ordinance just by signing it once it's enacted by the council. That's pretty common sense. The mayor could also not sign the ordinance and wait 10 days after the council has approved it, and it become law without the mayor's signature. Or the mayor could veto the city ordinance. And how does the mayor go about doing a veto? He or she would not sign the ordinance and send it back to the council with a written statement of his or her objections to the ordinance within 10 days. If the mayor decides to veto the ordinance, then what can the council do? Just like Congress and just like the General Assembly, the council's authorized to override. And so the council has 2 meetings from the time that the ordinance is, the vetoed ordinance is returned, to override the veto, but they have to vote by 1 more than a majority of the entire membership in order to effectuate that veto. So we'll do some math. If you have a 6-member council, which is the most common size of city councils in Kentucky, how many votes does it take to override a mayoral veto?
5.
5. That is absolutely correct. You have a 12-member council?
11.
8.
7, 8,
7's a majority. 1 more than a majority is 8
8.
in order to override the veto. And the council would have two meetings from the date that it's returned in order to do that veto. The next point is that the mayor has the ability, and you'll notice it uses the word may versus shall, the mandatory word shall, may vote only to break a tie. The mayor cannot vote at council meetings unless there is a tie, and that on any issue. And it's optional for the mayor. The mayor is not statutorily required to break a tie if it occurs. If the mayor, for example, mayor, if you got there to the council and it was 3-3 and you said, I'm not breaking this tie, what happens? You don't have to break it. What happens to the issue?
Does the issue die?
Issue dies for lack of a majority. So it's up to the mayor. That's the only time that the mayor may vote to break a tie. Is in that instance. It may not vote otherwise. The statutes require that the mayor preside over meetings of the council. The mayor is designated by state law as a presiding officer over meetings of the council. So every now and then we run into this question. If you have a council that decides that the mayor really stinks at presiding over, and you want to put somebody else to preside over meetings of the council, can you do that?
Only if you remove that mayor.
That's correct. You can't, remember the first slide, you can't change state law. State law says the mayor is a presiding officer. You can't modify that state law by local rule or local ordinance. As a presiding officer, the statute grants the mayor the ability to call special meetings of the city council. So the mayor, as presiding officer, can call special meetings, and we'll talk a little bit about regular and special meetings in the open meetings section. The statutes also require that the mayor provide for the orderly continuation of government if he or she is absent. Now, way back 30 or 40 years ago, 50 years ago, this item was much more important before we got these things. Now, rarely do you see a mayor, and just because they're going to be out of the city, provide some executive order or put somebody else in charge, because we're so connected. But before, when you couldn't be as connected, that was a really much more important function. So what you need to do and what you need to look at if you are a mayor, though, is what to do in the event of incapacity. With 416 cities in Kentucky, you'd be surprised it occurs more frequently than you would think that a mayor becomes incapacitated temporarily and sometimes permanently. It may drag on. Is that the mayor put in an executive order to ensure that someone can supervise the city and perform the mayoral functions in his or her absence.
JD, we do have a question from Lorraine Braun in Villa Hills. Can members of council call special meetings?
Yep. So Lorraine, that's a great anticipation question. When we get to the council section, you'll see that also if the mayor doesn't want to call a special meeting, a majority of the council or majority of the commission or board of commissioners has the authority to call a special meeting as well. Now, if the mayor's not at the meeting, don't let the mayor and the mayor council form of government misconstrue what this means in terms of providing for the orderly continuation. If you're at a meeting and the mayor's not there to preside, it's up to the council to determine how the meeting is going to be conducted, who will preside over the meeting. And it has to be a member of the city council. So the council, if the mayor's not at the council meeting performing that legislative function, the council selects a fellow council member to preside in the mayor's absence if the mayor's not there. Do we have any more questions about those points so far?
Could you repeat that very last line you said about
Yep.
appointing a council member?
Yep, if the mayor is not going to be at a council meeting to preside, it is the council that has to pick a council member to preside in the mayor's absence. The mayor does not have the authority to designate, and you can't pick someone who's not a council member, but it's a council decision in terms of presiding in the mayor's absence.
Thank you.
No problem.
So,
And
yeah,
from,
go ahead.
and from experience, if you have a split council, you may have to draw a name out of a hat.
You might, if you can't agree.
Okay, so the quick question I had with our city manager form of government, we have a mayor pro tem position that's basically based on who gets the most votes. So would they be the ones most logically to convene the meeting if the mayor wasn't able to attend a meeting?
Yes, Bob, and it's totally different for you outside of this mayor council in it's good. Another anticipation question. When we get to the city manager form of government and commission form, it's no fight. You've already decided who the mayor pro tem is in those cities, and that's who would automatically preside because you have to, by statute, designate somebody to do that. So you're completely correct on how that would apply in a city manager form of government. So this rule would only be applicable to mayor council plans.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So what looks like the mayor has a lot of roles and responsibilities. What are the roles and responsibilities of the city council? The typical legislative functions. If you're enacting local law, you're looking at the enactment of ordinances or regulations. That is in the council's purview. If you're going to have a smoking ban, a leash law, sidewalk ordinance, parking ordinances, anything that controls conduct, and so much of how a city operates is done through a legislative function, including the second and third bullet points. The levy of taxes and fees in order to generate revenue to provide the services, to pay the employees, to run the parks, to provide all of those services that the city provides to serve its constituents. So by ordinance, the legislative body decides what taxes are levied, what fees are levied, and at what rates they are. You're going to decide, are you going to do an insurance premium tax? If you do it, what's the rate of that tax going to be? If you do an occupational tax, how is that going to work? That's all legislation, and it's done by the council. And not only do you get to decide through the levy of taxes and at what rates they're set, what funds are coming in, you all are the determining entity of how those funds are going to be spent, how those services are going to be funded. So the appropriation of that revenue is done in the annual budget ordinance, which is a council function. So the appropriation, you control the purse strings, the council does in the mayor council form of government. As we mentioned before, the mayor has the authority to the council has the authority to establish additional non-elected officers, like the example we talked about with Mayor Miller there. If the ABC officer or the city engineer that was mentioned, and the authority to establish employment positions. So this is key. Sometimes we end up with new mayors who say, well, I'm going to create a position for my campaign manager, special assistant to the mayor, salary $100,000 a year. That can't be done. And when the mayor makes those appointments to employment position, they have to exist. They have to exist by virtue of council action adopted in the pay and classification plan. The approval of the mayor's appointments to those non-elected offices that we talked about. Setting of the compensation for both non-elected officers and employees. State law requires you to adopt by ordinance a pay and classification plan, and that varies from city to city, and this applies to every city, not just mayor council cities. You have to have an ordinance that says, here are our positions, here are what each position gets paid, and set that out in your pay and classification plan ordinance. So one of the things you may want to look at if you're a new official is to ask to see your city's ordinance. And that's going to vary from city to city. We have if we have Owensboro, I know we have Owensboro on here. If we have Covington on here, that's going to be, as a bigger city, that's going to be a much more complex ordinance. And in some cities, smaller cities, the council may comply with that by simply listening the salary out for each position line item in the budget ordinance. But the compensation range, the actual compensation amount is determined by the council. So whether the position exists and what it's going to get paid or could be paid is a council function. Likewise, the council is responsible for setting the compensation of elected city officers. Don't get overly excited here. Generally, we have a few people who are like, man, I know what I'm going to do come January. I'm going to give myself a big old raise. You can't do that. Kentucky Constitution prohibits individuals from, or councils and legislative bodies, not only for city offices, but for county offices and state offices, from modifying the compensation of an elected city officer during their term of office. So whenever you do change the compensation, you have to do it by the first Monday in May in the year that the officer is going to be elected at the latest. That's prior to the primary, that's prior to the general election. I think that probably tells you why the compensation for city officials is so low in Kentucky, because you have to set it prior to the time you stand for election. And a lot of people, the voters, disapprove of those pay increases. But your deadline for doing it would be the first Monday in May in the year that the officer is going to be elected. So if that's your next opportunity, would be for officials taking office on January 1, 2023. And you would have to do it by first Monday in May of 2022 to change the compensation for the elected official. And you can't do it. It makes sense. It's a constitutional provision that says, hey, you can't get mad at the mayor and say you're going to cut his salary or her salary in half just because you don't like what they're doing. That's a reason for that prohibition inside the statute, inside the Constitution. Now, one rule is that you can do cost of living increases. So you may put a little asterisk by that general rule. You can do COLAs year over year. You can't pull out your ordinance from 1977 and it says you get paid $200 and try to bring it up to 2021 amounts, but you can change year over year by a COLA adjustment, the compensation. And the Constitution sets and caps the maximum constitution for elected city officials. And I believe that's somewhere around $76,000, $78,000 in that range that you can't exceed for that compensation. The council is responsible for conducting regular meetings at least once a month. A majority of the council, as Lorraine asked, has the ability to call a special meeting. If the mayor won't call it, the rest of the council can get together to call a special meeting if something comes up. And then that last bullet point is one that we see infrequently used, is the ability to investigate the activities of city government. Just like Congress can call in under limited circumstances, the council has the ability to inquire with city employees. They have to go through the mayor to investigate the activities and the administration of city government if that becomes necessary. So you can kind of see the way the legislative and the executive branches kind of need to have a symbiotic rely on one another. Even if you come down just to the example of hiring a city employee, the employment position has to exist. That's created by council. What the person's going to get paid is determined in that pay and classification plan. The money has to be in the budget in order to make the payment. In order for the mayor to decide which individual is going to occupy the position, that's up to the mayor. But without a position, the mayor has no position or no individual to appoint. It's a important relationship between the two of them. We have here a caution sign rather than a stop sign when it comes to these personnel issues, and typically that's where we get most questions. Likewise, believe it or not, probably not hard to believe, that's where we get the most lawsuits whenever we're making personnel decisions. It doesn't say stop, but this is a complex area. We have federal employment laws, state employment laws, especially when it comes to uniformed employees. Your cities have different policies and rules, but it's important if you're making personnel decisions to seek legal advice, know your city's policies, be aware of those limits on roles and authorities. I always put that in there because every 2 years, without fail, we have a council member who tries to fire the police chief or something along those lines. And it's important to know as council members in that form of government, it's important for you to know how much power do you have as an individual council member. Any council member want to answer that question? You have the power of one vote on the council. You don't have any separate executive or legislative functions. You have to be functioning as a body, and you have the power of one vote within that body. So be aware of those limits on the roles and responsibilities. Get legal advice. Call your city attorney. Call KLC if you have any questions when you're dealing with personnel issues.
So does that mean that if the council, wanted to, not necessarily investigate wrongdoing, but just investigate something, a single council member could not make that request? It would have to be the entire body making the request?
That's correct. It would be the council as a whole making that decision.
Thank you.
All right, let's move on to the commission and manager plans of government. And I'm going to talk about both of these together because they are similar. And then I'm going to separate them out because there are some unique features to each of them. Under the commission plan of government and manager plan of government, there isn't any separation of executive and legislative authority. Sometimes that's a source of consternation for the mayors in these forms of government. But all the executive and legislative authority, no separation, is vested with the city commission, acting as a body in the commission form of government. It's vested with the city board of commissioners in the city manager form of government, acting as a unit, as a legislative body. No separation. That means that mayors in these cities can't veto ordinances. They are considered in these forms of government members of the legislative body. There's a mayor and 4 commissioners in both of these forms of government. They can propose and vote on legislation, unlike the mayor who can, in the council form of government, who can only vote to break a tie. They don't have the responsibility for the sole supervision of employees. Again, all executive and legislative authority is in the body. And they don't have to worry about providing for the continuation of government. The mayor does have some special powers, even though they're not separate executive powers, does have some powers for presiding over meetings. The statutes say that the mayor is responsible for presiding over meetings, the execution, writing, signing all written obligation, notes and bonds and contracts falls to the mayor in these forms of government. The mayor in these forms of government can also call special meetings. Likewise, the commission, the rest of the commissioners in these forms of government, if the mayor doesn't call a special meeting as a presiding officer, a majority of the remaining commissioners can do so. In some statutes, the mayor has the ability to make appointments to some boards and commissions. Most commonly, the most common one that sticks out is a tourist and convention commission. The mayor makes those appointments, even though he or she doesn't have separate executive authority to those boards and commissions. Some utility commissions are governed that way by statute. And that's not all of them. There's just a few of them by statute that vests that with the mayor, regardless of the form of government. And then that last bullet point, often underestimated, but the mayor acts as the political ceremonial head of city government and is recognized as the head of the government in an emergency situation like what we're in right now. Executive can use executive orders in order to manage an emergency. If an emergency has been declared, if military law is declared, they're the head of the city government. But that role kind of became clear to me. I live in Richmond. My old mayor was president of the league. We'd go around and visit cities, and he did educate me. He said, JD, if you think for 1 minute that anybody else out on the street knows that there's a difference between Richmond and Berea or Covington and Edgewood, and knows that there's these different forms of city government, they all think the mayor, most citizens think the mayor has the same authority regardless of what city they're from. And as a result of that, they become a liaison on behalf of the public and serve as political head, even though they don't have the legal authority. But yeah, ceremonial head, ribbon cutting, other things like that. The mayor ends up serving that role, even though from a legal perspective, the legal authority to govern and to make executive or legislative decisions comes back to the commission or board of commissioners as a whole. So we go back through these bullet points. When we have combined executive and legislative authority, it's a commission or board of commissioners in the manager plan that enacts ordinances and ensures that they're enforced. The levy of taxes, and so the levy of taxes to fund the operation of the city and the appropriation, all with that commission or board of commissioners. Conducting regular meetings once a month is also a requirement. The commission and manager plan governments, the commission or board of commissioners can call special meetings. Guess what? At the end of the day, the appointment, discipline, termination of employees and supervision of employees and non-elected officers resides with the body as a whole, the commission or board of commissioners. Establishing the non-elected officers and employment positions, paying classification plan, setting the compensation, all with the commission or board of commissioners. Now, as Commissioner Glenn pointed out, there is a requirement that the commission and manager plans select a mayor pro tem. And at the first meeting of the council, the entirety of the commission or board of commissioners has to select one commissioner to serve in this capacity of mayor pro tem. And then when the mayor is absent in terms of presiding over meetings or any of the other acts and powers that the mayor may have, all those rights and powers are vested in the mayor pro tem in the absence of the mayor. Now, Bob said our highest vote getter always gets that. True or false? Kentucky state law requires you to select the highest vote getter.
I'm guessing no.
That's false. Most cities, though, by history, tradition, or just plain to avoid a cat fight at the first meeting of who will occupy that, give it to the highest vote getter. But you're not required to designate the highest vote getter as mayor pro tem in these forms of government. Now, keep in mind, in the council form of government that we covered in the slides prior, the position of mayor pro tem does not really exist like it does legally have to exist in the commission and manager plans. In the commission plan of government, I'm going to pull them out for a little bit. So if you're in the manager plan, this does not apply to you. You also have an additional duty to classify administrative functions of the city into departments. You may have a road department, you may have a police department, a parks department, all administrative department. All those are classified by ordinance. The departments have to be set out, and that is important so the city can provide the day-to-day superintendence or supervisory function over the functioning of the city, because it's hard to have 5 bosses. So the commission has 2 options to govern that day-to-day oversight. The easy button is to establish the office of a city administrator who would report back to the commission on the day-to-day oversight of those various departments. Some cities don't have the funds to do that. The other option, and this is most common, at that first meeting when you pick the mayor pro tem in this commission form of government, you designate one commissioner to have a very limited liaison type of superintendent's function over each department. So later on, when we get together, when we start having meetings and you can attend, you may run into somebody from a city who introduces themselves as, "Hi, I'm the police commissioner in the city of whatever, or I'm the roads commissioner. That means that they've been designated in that first meeting as having that superintendent's function. It doesn't give the commissioner the authority to hire and fire, to bind the city budgetarily. It's just more of a liaison function. If something big comes up, the police chief may call the police commissioner who says, hey, mayor, we need to call a special meeting, or hey, rest of my fellow commissioners, we need to call a special meeting. We got to take some personnel action. It's not final authority, and ultimate executive and legislative authorities vested with the city commission. The city commission can override any action that's taken by an individual commissioner in that superintendent's role, or if you've hit the easy button and hired a city administrative officer, ultimately that rests with the commission. Ultimate executive and legislative authority. Now, just uniquely to the city manager plan, not applicable to council forms of government, not applicable to the commission form of government. The unique feature of the city manager form of government in places like Owensboro and Covington, Newport, is that you have to have a city manager. And the duties of the office of city manager is outlined both in state statute, and you're required to have a local ordinance that defines and establishes the position. And the city may add additional responsibilities to that office in the ordinance. So if you're from one of those cities, one of the things you may want to look at, in addition to that pay and classification plan I mentioned, was what has the city set out as a defined role of the city manager. The ordinance has to establish qualifications. Those vary from city to city. It's a local choice. Some of them require educational attainment. Some of them are experience-based. The ordinance sets out those qualifications in your city. Once the Board of Commissioners and the city manager form of government decides to hire someone as city manager, they're appointed for an indefinite term by a majority vote of all the members of the Board of Commissioners. So majority vote of all members have to approve the city manager. And once they're in the position, they can only be removed by a majority vote of all the commissioners after special notice, 30-day notice is given to the manager that he or she might be removed in a hearing if the manager requests it to be conducted. And a majority vote of all the commissioners, so all 5 people, you have to have 3 votes in order to hire. You have to have 3 votes in order to fire after going through that process with the city manager. State law does set out requirements. Keep in mind, in addition, your local ordinance may prescribe additional duties. The city manager has to serve as the chief administrative officer of the city on behalf of the Board of Commissioners. This looks an awful lot like what the mayor does in the mayor council form of government. In some respects, the preparation and proposal of the budget for the Board of Commissioners comes from the city manager in this instance. Administering the budget, once the Board of Commissioners has adopted it, it goes back to the city manager to perform that administrative function on their behalf. State law requires that they prepare and submit to the Board of Commissioners end-of-year reports on finances and administrative activities. Many cities require more frequent reporting in their ordinance. They carry out, as instructed by the Board of Commissioners, any executive responsibilities that the Board of Commissioners assigns. So the Board of Commissioners is the boss of the city manager. Again, not individual commissioners, but the board acting as a whole. The manager doesn't have the authority to unilaterally hire or fire. The manager's role is to make recommendations to the Board of Commissioners on personnel matters, whether someone needs to be hired or terminated. That falls to the city manager. And then that day-to-day supervision of the departments and the city employees are with the city manager. It's really important to keep in mind that you've put somebody there to serve on your behalf, to administer the functions in that city manager office. But at the end of the day, the buck stops with the Board of Commissioners. Ultimate executive authority is vested with that board, and the board can override any action that's taken by the city manager as ultimate executive and legislative authority. Same caution sign when it comes to personnel for the commission and manager forms of government. Exercise caution. Don't stop. You may make changes, but but get appropriate legal advice, be aware of the policies, know your limits in terms of your roles and responsibilities. So with that, that in a nutshell, and we could go hours and hours about the nuances and the exceptions to the exceptions, is the basics of what you need to know about the way cities are set up. I'm sure some of you may want to run to the restroom or get a drink. We will take about a 5-minute break. We'll
To follow up, this is Terry Courtney from Walton. To follow up on what Matt's asking, what recourse does council have if the mayor broke a tie in that situation?
if it is approving the planning commission recommendation on a text amendment or map amendment, the statute's very clear to effectuate the override. It has to be approved by a majority of the legislative body. So if the mayor's broken the tie, it hasn't statutorily, in that instance, done an override of the planning commission recommendation. So I bring that point up to the mayor. If the council, if the city's under the impression that they've overridden the planning commission's recommendation, they have not, and the person seeking the map amendment or the text amendment to the zoning regulation would have the argument that it goes into effect if it hasn't been acted on in a timely way, that the statute was not complied with, and therefore the recommendation from the planning commission stands. Did I answer that the same way Morgan did?
Yes, somewhat. I'm confused a bit. However, I'll work with Matt and just to understand what options we have. Because again, it just happened within the last month, 6 weeks.
Yep. Statute says just very clearly, it's 100.211. I do remember that statute. It says in order to override a planning commission recommendation, it has to be approved by a majority of the legislative body.
Thank you, sir.
You're welcome. All right, it's 7:06. That means we better move along here and talk about open meetings. And I promise when we're finished with open meetings, you'll get some sweet relief and not have to listen to my voice much anymore. The open meetings law, likewise, we think it's extremely important that before you go into your first council meeting or commission meeting, that you understand what's expected of you in terms of transparency under Kentucky's Open Meeting Act. And the best way to describe the Open Meetings Act is to look at the statutory text, which sets out the purpose of this law. The very first bullet point there, the business of the people shall not be conducted in secret. In Kentucky, prior to around 1978, 79 era, there wasn't really any laws that required you to give public notice for meetings. County governments, city governments, other governmental units could essentially conduct their meetings without the public even knowing that they were occurring. And then Kentucky adopted what's commonly referred to as sunshine laws to govern both meetings and records, as Morgan will talk about here in just a bit. The purpose of the law is to allow people to view and have an opportunity to some extent to participate in the formation of local policy, see those debates, the decisions that are being made, if you're enacting local laws that impact them, if you're spending the money you've collected from them. It allows them that opportunity to, at least at a bare minimum, to see and hear that deliberative legislative process. And it serves as a check on government. Since those laws have been enacted, you see much less self-dealing, much less corruption. If the people can see the deliberative process and ensure that you're doing what they elected you to do on their behalf. So that's the purposes of the open meetings law and why we have it in Kentucky. Very first question we got to answer is who has to comply with the open meetings law? Pretty common sense. The council, city council, the city commission, the city board of commissioners, all those legislative bodies there clearly have to comply when you're meeting as a council. That's easy. The harder one, sometimes where cities get tripped up, is that second bullet point. Any committee, subcommittee, commission, ad hoc advisory board, whether permanent, temporary, or whatever, if it's created by the city's legislative body or the chief executive officer of the city, that group, the progeny of anything created by the city council or mayor or commission, also has to comply with the open meetings law. So if you think you're just creating this temporary parade committee or festival committee, if it's created by you, that committee also, just like the council, commission, or board of commissioners does, also has to comply with the Kentucky open meetings law. So first step, who does it apply to? And I'm going to talk about today in the context of city governing bodies, legislative body, councils, commission, and board of commissioners. So now that we have established it applies to your council meetings and commission meetings, what types of meetings are covered? Now, Kentucky law starts out a little scary, and it says and defines meeting of any gathering of two or more people. Now, that's nuts if you really think about the meaning of that. Listen to that definition. Any gathering of two or more people. What is that? That's basically any conversation you have with another person. Luckily, Kentucky's Open Meetings Act does not apply to every type of meeting. And if you remember anything from this open meeting section, the first bullet point is what you're going to want to remember, which is the definition of when the open meetings law kicks in. And it only kicks in if we're talking about any meeting of a quorum where you're taking action or talking about public business. A few key terms to define in that bullet point: quorum, meeting of a quorum, where you're taking action or discussing public business. The first word, quorum, who knows what that means? Anybody?
Majority.
Majority.
Required minimum to hold a meeting.
The minimum required. So half plus one, half of the membership plus one would be considered a quorum. So any gathering of a quorum, meeting of a quorum, where you're taking action or making a commitment to take action, or you're talking about public business, then you're gonna kick in and have to comply with all these requirements in a couple slides here to make your meeting open and comply with the Kentucky open meetings law. So any meeting of a quorum where you're taking action, that's pretty easy. You're going to take a vote or a commitment to take a vote together with a quorum, or you talk about any subject matter over which you have jurisdiction. You have to comply with the open meetings law. And then the sub point here, unless the meeting is about a law that's exempted, about a subject that's exempted under the open meetings law. And I'll talk about those exceptions to the general rule at the end of this.
Katie, we have a few questions. Jennifer Jasper from Erlanger asked, does the open meetings law apply to city events such as tree lighting, a Memorial Day ceremony, etc.?
Okay, let me get to the next page and I will answer that. Ms. Jasper, did you say?
Yes.
Okay, I will answer that. So any meetings of quorum where you're taking action or discussing public business. Also, the law prohibits you from getting around that general rule where you conduct a series of less than quorum meetings where you say, okay, these three council members are getting together and we're going to send two of us to go meet with another one, and then those two go meet with another one. Having a series of less than quorum meetings with the intent to circumvent the law is also a violation. So you can't divide it up into little mini meetings to try to get a decision made with the intent of circumventing open meetings law in order to do that. So Ms. Jasper is a great question. What are the types of gatherings that aren't subject to the Open Meetings Act? Obviously, if you have 3 members of a 6-member council. That's not a meeting of a quorum. That's easy, right? So meetings of less than a quorum, if you don't, as long as you're not doing many meetings with the intent to circumvent the law. But you can go to things like conventions, conferences, training sessions, social gatherings, tree lightings, holiday parties, things of that nature, as long as you don't do what? You can be together as a quorum, but you can't take action as a quorum, and you can't discuss public business. Now, that's easier said than done, because the one thing you probably have in common with everybody else on your council or commission is the fact that you're all on the council or commission. But if you get together, the whole 6-member council could get together at the restaurant and talk about Kentucky basketball, right? You don't have any authority, even though as hard as you may wish you could change it, but you don't have any authority to govern Kentucky basketball, talk about the weather, things of that nature. Those aren't a discussion of public business if it's not an item over which a city has jurisdiction. So you can be together with a quorum, training sessions like this, conferences. You can all ride in the same van to the KLC City Officials Academy. Of course, that's virtual this year. The conference this September. As long as you don't talk about public business, you can be in the presence of a quorum. Hopefully that addresses your question. Does that take care of your question? I'm gonna assume.
You said yes.
Oh, okay. I can't see the chat. I'm sorry about that.
We had another question that I think you're going to answer next slide. Mayor Dalton or Mayor Miller from Stanford asked, does this include a group text?
Perfect. It's not on the next slide, but that's the very next point I was going to bring up, which is you've got to be careful. Let's go back to the last slide. And you're looking at meetings of a quorum where actions taken or public business is discussed. Technology can get you in that situation unknowingly. It started first, Mayor Miller, with the reply all feature on email. Sometimes a mayor would send out and may still send out an email to all the members of the city council, and you get people starting to hit reply all, what they think ought to be done, and you end up with a discussion. Likewise, on a group text. Likewise, you can end up in that same situation on a Facebook forum or a social media platform. And so you've got to watch that feature if you're group texting or you're group emailing or you're all grouped together on a Facebook or Twitter post or whatever the social media platform of the day is. You've got to watch that you're not having a discussion on a city topic or committing to take action with a quorum present. So a lot of city officials, if they send something that they want to inform everybody about, do the blind carbon copy feature on an email to where people can't hit reply all, where it doesn't facilitate that discussion. I would avoid group texting because, of course, if that does become a meeting and you're talking public business with that group text message on your personal phone, that Morgan's going to talk about how that will bring you into open records laws in that case. So if you want to communicate something all at once without facilitating a discussion, the best way to do so is email and to blind carbon copy everybody on the email that you want to send it to, so that way you can't hit reply all. But you got to be very careful on these technology platforms not to facilitate a discussion of public business among a quorum. So if we can move on to the next one, if there's not any additional questions. So if you have a meeting of a quorum and you're going to take action or you're going to discuss public business, you're in the Open Meetings Act. How do you make your meeting open? And the law says anytime you have that meeting of a quorum where you're doing any of those things, you have to hold the meeting at a time that's convenient to the public. And what what does that mean? A time convenient to the public. That means you're not setting your meeting at 2 a.m. That means you're not setting your meeting at a time that minimizes public participation. Now, we've seen the Attorney General uphold 7 a.m. meetings and 11 p.m. meetings. You know, the only time you would meet at any time between midnight and 5 or 6 a.m. would be as if you have an emergency situation. A lot of you probably have different opinions about what time would be most convenient to the public. People who work late shift may think the morning is a better time to have meetings. Notice that the law does not say you hold it at the most convenient time or the time that's convenient for most of the public. You would have to do a poll that would be changing. Just don't pick a time. Don't pick a time that that would result in minimizing public participation. You can't say, "Oh, let's have that at 10 o'clock tonight," and maybe none of the old people, the contrary old people, will come to the meeting. You're violating the spirit of the open meetings law when you set your times. So, if your meeting is a quorum, taking action or discussing public business, it has to be at a time that's convenient to the public. Second feature is that it has to be at a place that's convenient to the public. That really has two meanings. One, convenience in terms of the geographic location of the meeting. And the general rule is this: in order for the city to meet, you have to meet within your corporate boundaries, within the jurisdiction of the city, unless it's necessary to do otherwise. Now, there are circumstances where it might be necessary to meet elsewhere in terms of the geography. You can think of a situation if you have a council chamber that seats 12 people, but you have 200 people that want to show up because you're talking about a controversial issue, a planning and zoning issue. Generally, some of those tend to be controversial. You may have the facility a mile outside of your boundaries, like a high school gym or an elementary school cafeteria or auditorium, where you could accommodate the public. In Kentucky, you can't be in two cities at one time unless you're one of the 83 cities in Louisville Metro. Richmond and Berea. I live in Richmond. I'll use it as an example. Even though the commission and council of those two cities may get together, we're picking one place or another, Radcliffe and Elizabethtown. If you have a joint meeting, you're having to pick a place to convene that meeting that may necessitate meeting outside of your city limits. So geographical location, you got to meet in your city limits. And that rule really came as a result. I like to bring this up in Northern Kentucky. I cut my teeth on this first thing because Covington, the city of Covington, decided that it was going to take a retreat to Lexington. I don't know why you come to Lexington for a retreat, but the commission, the board of commissioners and the city staff were all coming to Lexington to do a retreat. And think about the use of that term. Who are you retreating from? Retreating from your public. And there's no retreat when you're in these seats. So you can't go off and say, well, we're going to meet in Lexington because we need to get away, or we need a change of venue. You can change your venue inside your corporate boundaries. The only time that you're not able to do that, or the only time that you can avoid the rule of meeting inside your corporate boundaries is if it's necessary to go outside of them. And then places convenient to the public also means accommodating facilities. The public has a right to see and hear. So acoustic, you have to look at acoustics. Can you fit everybody in? You may adjust if you don't know. I think somebody from Villa Hills I talked to is on here. Recently, there was a controversial issue there, and a lot of people came. I think they helped facilitate that by providing closed circuit TVs in other rooms. But if people can't hear and see, and you're made aware of that, then you have to facilitate. Now, this is where I'm always reminded that every city has at least one jerk. And we see these opinions. Sometimes they get elected too. But sometimes we see these opinions where somebody says, well, the city violated the open meetings law because I couldn't hear a word they said. They never told anyone they couldn't hear. You're not expected to be clairvoyant or mind readers. If somebody says, hey, I can't hear, then you would have the obligation to adjust the volume so the person could hear, but you're not expected to be able to know that without notice. So luckily, the Attorney General, in interpreting the Open Meetings Act, hasn't provided. So meetings of a quorum where you're taking action or discussing public business, you're holding the meeting at a time that would be convenient to the public, at a place that would be convenient to the public for their access. You also have to take minutes of the meeting, and the minutes have to be recorded whenever any action is taken. Now, at some meetings, it may just say the meeting convened and the meeting adjourned if you didn't do anything else. But this is where your city clerks come in, where they really help you. They add narrative to it, but at a bare minimum, if it's a meeting that's subject to the open meetings law, gathering of a quorum where you're taking action or discussing public business, you have to have minutes. Every action that's taken at the meeting has to be specified, and the votes of each individual member has to be recorded in the minutes. The other requirement is that you can't place any conditions on attendance. So you can't put a requirement on that only the citizens of the city attend, or that you have to be a state resident, or that only Republicans can come. You can't have a ladies' night at the council meeting. No criteria that you have to sign in, that you have to identify yourself. No conditions whatsoever can be placed on any individual's right to attend a council or commission or board of commissioners meeting. Now, that is very different. If you recall, I said that the right of the public under the Open Meetings Act is to both see and hear. It does not give the public the right to speak or address the legislative body. So you can place any condition you want to that the council or commission or board of commissioners deems necessary on the right to speak or address. You can require people to give their name, to sign in 24 hours in advance. Only give that right to citizens of your city. You can put conditions on the right to speak, but not on the right to attend. And the last key way that the city makes its meeting open, if it is a meeting of a quorum where you're taking action or discussing public business, is the rights of the press and the media to cover, attend, and broadcast the meeting. That used to be when you had bulky cameras and things of that nature in small rooms. There's a provision in there that says as long as it doesn't disrupt the meeting. We're at a stage with cell phones and other equipment and recording devices where it's pretty much looked at as a universal and absolute right of the media to both attend it and to broadcast the meeting. Regular meetings, additional requirements for that. Every one of your cities has an ordinance on the books that sets out what time you're going to meet. We are mentioned under Kentucky law for your council, commissions, and board of commissioners. State law requires that you meet at least once a month at times and place fixed by ordinance. So every one of your cities have an ordinance that's already on the books that says something along the lines of the regular council meeting of the city of Edgewood will be on the first Monday of the month at 7:00 p.m. at City Hall. Every one of you have an ordinance like that. You have to fix your regular meeting dates by ordinance. You can amend ordinances. That changes. That's looked at sometimes as new council members and commissioners take office. In order to facilitate the meeting, you can amend the ordinance and change the time, but it has to be embodied in that regular meeting ordinance. And once it's adopted, you're going through the ordinance enactment procedure that Morgan's going to talk about. And the schedule has to be made readily available to the public, in addition to the public requirements for adopting an ordinance. And if you deviate at all from that regular meeting schedule, and they're held at a different time, a different place, on a different date, other than what's specified in the ordinance, they become special meetings. And there's special requirements for calling those special meetings. As we said before, that the mayor in all forms of government has the ability to call a special meeting. or a majority of the rest of the legislative body. If the mayor doesn't want to call a special meeting, a majority of the legislative body can do so. In order to call a special meeting, any meeting that falls outside of what's detailed in your regular meeting ordinance, you have to, in order to do that, provide a written notice. This doesn't say you're paying the newspaper to publish a big advertisement, but you have to provide a written notice to the mayor and all the members of the legislative body, to the media who have on file a request to receive notices of special meetings. Now, this is key. Not all media, only those media who have filed with the city a request to receive those notifications. You know, the Paducah Sun probably does not care that the Fort Mitchell City Council is going to have a special meeting. Most likely not. If they do, they need to file a request with Fort Mitchell to receive notices. So written notice has to be sent to all the members of the council, the commission, board of commissioners, and the mayor, and those media outlets that have on file a request to receive notices 24 hours in advance of the meeting. And it has to be sent by fax, by mail, or by personal delivery to each of those individuals. So listen, most people don't have fax machines. U.S. Postal Service isn't so reliable. Personal delivery is costly and sometimes complicated. And the last option for sending those notices, which is the one that is most commonly used now, is email. But email can only be used to deliver you or the members of the media that have the right to receive these notices in the event that you provide your written consent with the preferred email address of where you would receive those special meeting notices. So your clerk, if he or she has not already done so, is probably going to be asking you for your written consent and your preferred email address in order to facilitate the delivery of those special meeting notices. So that way they don't have to figure out U.S. postal delivery, fax machines, which you probably don't have, and or try to use city personnel and resources in order to deliver those special meeting notices. In addition, that special meeting notice has to be posted 24 hours in advance at the city hall and at a place where the meeting is going to be held. Now, generally that's one and the same place. If the meeting's at City Hall, you're just posting the notice up at City Hall. But one of those examples, if you're going to the elementary school cafeteria or the gymnasium at the high school or a church auditorium or whatever, you have to post a notice both at City Hall and at the place where the meeting is going to be held in order to comply. Now, what has to be in that written notice? The written notice has to include the date of the meeting, the time of the meeting, the place, so date, time, and place. So that way you can orient what's going on so people can show up. And then very importantly, in addition to date, time, and place of the meeting, you also have to include an agenda for the special meeting. And that's really important. You notice when I talk about regular meeting, there's not a statutory or legal requirement for you to have an agenda for regular meetings. Now, it would be really silly not to. It would be a circus and chaos. Most every city I know has an agenda for special meetings, but you have to for special meetings. And the reason that's important is because at a special meeting that deviates from your regular meeting, you can't talk about any other subject other than those that are detailed on the special meeting agenda. You can't talk about anything else. The council or commission or board of commissioners can only talk about what's listed on the agenda. And the agenda has to be specific. You can't list items like new business or city business. You have to particularly identify the topic matters that you are going to discuss so the public can discern with a reasonable degree of confidence what is going to be discussed at the special meeting. If you talk about anything else, or you put too general of a subject matter on the agenda, you're going to be in violation of the open meetings law. So bringing it all together here at the end, and then I'll come back and answer the questions on Open Meetings Act before giving it over to Morgan. If your meeting is a quorum and you're taking action, remember that definition: meetings of a quorum where actions taken or public business is being discussed, you hold it at a convenient place, convenient time, you take minutes, you don't place any conditions on the right to attend, and you allow the press to cover. For regular meetings, it's set out in your ordinance. Any deviation would be treated as a special meeting where you have to provide the 24-hour written notice, unless, now we have some areas here, there's exceptions to the exceptions in the law. And these are the four most common exceptions to that general rule about having to conduct your meeting and your discussion out in the open. If you're talking about selling or buying real property, that should say real property, so you may make note of that. Deliberations on acquisition or sale of real property, you can go into a closed or what sometimes referred to as an executive session to discuss that. Why do you think that's the case? Why can you come out of the public spotlight? You're talking about buying or selling property.
You don't want to
People
drive,
assume-
you don't want to drive the price up.
That's correct. If you're out in open and you tell the mayor he can offer up to $100,000 for the property, how much, if you've done that in public, how much do you think you're going to pay for the property? $100,000. So if you look at all these exceptions, this is a good example. These exceptions aren't designed to protect you all as the elected officials. They're designed to protect the public and the public's resources. That's really demonstrated in the second bullet point as well. You can go into closed or executive session to talk about proposed or pending litigation. Why? Because if you have the discussion with your counsel and your attorney about a litigation matter in open forum, what do you think is going to happen? Who do you think is going to listen to that conversation? Your opposing counsel. You don't have any attorney-client privilege. Likewise, if you're going to settle a lawsuit and you say, let's authorize the mayor to settle the lawsuit for no more than $200,000. What are you going to settle the lawsuit for? $200,000. So those types of things, you're protecting the public's resources. That's really what that's designed for, not to protect you. And look, on this litigation exception, it has to be real or threatened litigation. It can't be speculative in nature. You can't say, hey, I ran into coming in City Hall, I ran into Bob. He's really mad and he's crazy. He's probably going to sue us. So let's go into closed session. It has to be a real, legitimate threat of proposed or pending litigation in which the city is going to be involved. The third most common, and maybe the most common, but the third bullet point is what is incorrectly referred to as a personnel exemption. If you read this, it does not allow you to go into closed session for just general personnel matters. It has to be the appointment, the discipline, or the termination, discussions which may lead to that appointment, discipline, or termination of a particular individual. Not about whether to give raises, not about general personnel issues. It has to be the appointment, discipline, or termination of a particular individual. And you can go into closed session in that instance. And then the fourth bullet point, again, underscores why we have exceptions to the open meetings law. Again, if you're talking with a business entity, if an open discussion would jeopardize the business entity coming and citing themselves in your city limits, retaining someone or a business that may leave, expanding or upgrading of the business, if that discussion with the business entity in open session could jeopardize that economic development opportunity, that job creation or retention opportunity in your city, and you're talking with the business entity, you can go into closed session with that business entity to do that. Now, another misconception that a lot of people have is that if you hit, and there are more exceptions to that, and we'll go through those at the City Officials Academy, or you'll learn them as you go along if you can attend the City Officials Academy. But another misconception is that if we're going to talk about one of those four things, the mayor can just bang the gavel and saying, all right, closed session time. That doesn't happen that way. You've got to start out procedurally in open session. You have to convene the meeting, either a regular meeting or a special meeting. You start out in open session, and in order to go into that closed or executive session, you have to follow a certain procedure, and it's complicated. You have to state the general nature of the business, the reason for going into closed session, and get this, the specific provision of the Kentucky Revised Statutes that authorize you to go into closed session. Again, this is where you'll really appreciate your clerks, your managers, administrators, your city attorneys, because you probably aren't going to have the KRS provisions memorized that authorize you to go into closed session. So you have to make that in the form of a motion, and that motion has to be carried by a majority of a quorum, at least, to go into that closed session. So it would generally go something like this: to properly remove yourself into closed session, a council member or commissioner say, Madam Mayor, I move that we go into closed session under KRS 61-810-1C to discuss the pending lawsuit against the city because open discussion could jeopardize our ability to settle this claim or this lawsuit. And that would have to be seconded and carried by a majority before going into closed session. Notice you've general nature, specifically why, and citing the revised statute provision, which authorizes you to do so. Once you're in closed session, if that's carried by motion and vote, you can't talk about anything else in the closed session other than those items that have been publicly announced in that motion and vote. And I've been around long enough and in enough closed sessions with you all, probably 9 out of 10 closed sessions I've been in start out like this. Now that we're in here, we ought to talk about this. You can't do that. You can't talk about anything other than what was announced going into closed session. And while you're in closed session, you can't take any final action in the closed session. You got to come back out for final action into the open session. So that is a basic summary of Kentucky open meetings law. I will add one more thing before we do questions, and that is you are going to be coming onto the council. You're going to be coming onto the commission at a really unique time. And at the end of last General Assembly legislative session, we had some provisions added to the law during this emergency declaration of emergency in this pandemic that help facilitate meetings like this with your council over Zoom or Teams or GoToMeeting or whatever crazy irritating platforms that you could have virtual meetings. And the law allows you to do that. Without those provisions, you can do virtual meetings, but you have to provide a single location for people to go to, a physical location. We suspended that requirement as long as the pandemic emergency order from Governor Beshear is in effect. So a lot of you are going to be meeting just like this. And remember, the right of the public when it comes to meeting is to see and hear. And so you have to have your camera on, unless there's a technological capacity issue for not being able to conduct the meeting over video teleconference. So let me see whether we have any. Morgan, you got them organized, or I need to try to read them?
I do. I have several questions for you. The first one is from Lorraine Braun in Villa Hills. She asked whether minutes needed to be taken of committee meetings as well.
Excellent question. So go back to the second slide, I guess, to say who does it apply to? And Open Meetings Act applies to any creation of the body. So any committee, whether it's permanent or temporary, all those requirements that we talked about applying in the context of the council and commission, even if it's a parade committee, if it's a budget committee or whatever else it is, place convenient to the public, time convenient to the public, no conditions on attendance, the press has the right to attend and broadcast, and that very last requirement, Lorraine, you have to have minutes of the committee meeting.
Okay, and the next question is from Beth Nyman from Dayton. And she asked if you want to have a casual exchange of ideas about public business, but not necessarily take action. For example, what do we think would improve the quality of life of young families in town? how would you have that conversation legally?
Well, you couldn't have that conversation among a quorum. I mean, you're talking about potentially specific actions, Beth, that would lead to something that the city could do. So if you were having that dialogue, what actions could we take collectively as a council in order to improve the quality of life? And you're saying, well, we could create this park, or we could improve the sidewalks, or do business grants, or whatever the topic is. If you're having that discussion and dialogue, that is a discussion of public business, and you can't do it with a quorum. Now, a lot of people get hung up on that series of less than quorum meetings. You're probably going to have that dialogue separately and apart with other council members, other council members here in Dayton. You can have a conversation with one or two fellow council members, as long as you don't have a demonstrative intent to circumvent the requirements of the open meetings law. Or if you're going to have that kind of retreat, cathartic type discussion like that, you notice it up as a special meeting. Otherwise you're going to be in violation. Does that make sense? I can actually see Beth on the screen. I've got it turned on now. That makes sense to you, Beth?
Hi. Yes, I think so. I was just worried about this subject about open meetings, and I've been warned about it a lot. Like careful, and I'm like, wow, how do you even just sort of have a, casual kind of like, what do you think about murals, or what do you think, without it becoming a thing, and not necessarily actionable ever, just sort of.
You can definitely do it with your peers, but just don't get in a quorum and have the discussion.
Okay, thank you.
And don't do it with an intent to circumvent the requirements of the law. Don't have a big maniacal type of design to say, hey, I'm going to get all these votes before we get to the daggone meeting.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so the next question is from Scott. I don't know, I want to say Beasler from Dayton. Do board meeting times have to be set by city ordinance? This is a good question.
That is a great question. So we said all those boards, committees have to comply with the open meetings law. What generally will occur is that the committee will adopt a resolution establishing a regular meeting schedule. The city council may do that in an ordinance. The regular meeting for those committees could be established. A lot of committees won't have any regular meeting time. They'll treat every single one of them as a special meeting, but you could set the committee meeting times by ordinance, or the committee, once it gets together, could adopt a resolution establishing the regular meeting times, again, making that publicly available, readily available to the public, so that they knew that the regular meeting times. Either way, ordinance or resolution of the committee itself. Ordinance of the city or resolution of the committee.
The next two questions, one is from Mayor Miller in Stanford, and the other is from, oh heck, we had a bunch of them pile up. Chad Finkenbeiner from Orchard. It cuts them off. Anyway, and they're COVID related questions, so I wanted to take them together. They were asking about whether meetings on Zoom, do all the special rules apply since it's not a normal location, and what other guidance is there regarding both regular and special meetings and when they have to be noticed?
Yeah, regular meetings, your notification in the Zoom era, if you're going to conduct it virtually, you have to treat it as a special meeting. So you got to have an agenda that lists at least the link, the way you're going to access it, and that was put into the law so that way you couldn't just have a link in a virtual meeting where nobody could see, and that's really essential, Mayor, where the legislature did away with the requirement for you providing a physical location. The keys to that meeting, as long as you put that out, the link, the public has access. You can keep everybody on mute. You can provide them again, they don't have the right to address, but you got to provide them that access to be able to observe the virtual meetings. You've got to be sure all your members, remember, the public's right under open meetings is to both see and hear. So that way they could see you if you roll your eyes or make a mean face while you're talking. They're going to want to, the public wants to see that. And my wife says that she can tell more based on the way my face gets ugly while I'm talking. And that really is part of the process in terms of seeing and observing. So you can't let council members come on there and turn their camera off. See and hear, remember to do that. Those are the notice requirements. We're going to have to watch through this legislative session. It's quite possible that the General Assembly will end the governor's executive order. So we got to be sure we continue those exception rules if the General Assembly takes action to end the governor's original emergency declaration, because your ability to do those virtual meetings is tied to this original declaration of the emergency situation as a result of the pandemic. So that's where I'll hopefully come in handy and be helpful, watching them in Frankfurt to be sure we continue some of that stuff and represent your interest on that. Well, is there any more really quick? I know you got a lot of Morgan has a lot of important stuff to say.
There are a couple of there's one really good question that one of them is from Lorraine Braun in Villa Hills. Executive sessions need to be confidential, right? No discussing among friends, etc. And is there a penalty?
Yeah, there is no state law. There is no state law that governs if you're in closed session. And you heard me say before, every city has at least one jerk, and sometimes they get elected. Sometimes that one jerk comes out of an executive session and tells people what they're going to purchase the property for, or breaches the attorney-client privilege. It's a real shame. You look at the purpose for the closed session. So state law doesn't prescribe any penalty, but the purpose is not to protect you. It's not for the council or commission to get back there and gossip. It is designed to protect the public's resources. And so the divulgence of any of those things that you're going into closed session for could really have a negative impact on that. It makes sense if the council member comes out and says, guess what? They talked about all kinds of stuff they shouldn't have in closed session, right? But if they come out and say, can you believe it? And I've seen people walk out of those, it's infuriating, walk straight out and go right up to the newspaper and say, well, it looks like we're going to buy that property for up to $100,000. That is a problem, but there's not a state law prohibition. Shame on the person who does it, because you're affecting the public's resources, a public right that's designed to protect them. As a result, there are a few cities, and it's too complicated for tonight, but you can start and we'll be happy to talk to you about it, that have put in their ethics ordinance the duty to protect that confidential information, which has to be carefully crafted because you have a First Amendment right to speak out on matters of public concerns. But there are a couple of cities that's adopted some ethics ordinances which impose penalties for the divulgence of that information. And those really originated, I don't know if anybody from Independence is on here, but about 20 years ago, we had a council lady in Independence who did, I guarantee everything that divulged every single discussion. And I think we got a couple of cities that do that. So you can contact us. I'll say that at the end here. My email is jd@klc.org. You can call Morgan, you can call us, email us. We'd be happy. We're here for you. We really want to answer all your questions. So feel free to do that if we get on more complicated areas. Morgan? Oh, Chris knows exactly who I'm talking about from Independence. All right. I won't speak yet. She's not with us anymore alive anymore. So I've tried not to speak ill of her, but you probably do know who we're talking about. Morgan, let me introduce Morgan, our Director of Municipal Law. She's going to talk to you about budgeting, procurement, ethics, all kinds of open records, all kinds of important things that you're going to want to listen to. She does a great job heading up our municipal law department. So Morgan, take it away. You got 37 minutes.
Thank you. I can do it. Okay. my turn to share the screen. This is always, okay, I think I did it. It's always the scariest time for me, screen sharing. Okay, y'all, so now that we have taught you about open meetings and the form of city government and the like, we're going to talk about open records. I know you're really excited to hear about open records. It's everybody's favorite topic. It's not boring at all. But it's also really, really important. And it mirrors the Open Meetings Act pretty precisely. It has, in the beginning of the Open Records Act, it has the same expression of legislative intent as the Open Meetings Act, which is that the business of elected officials, the business of city government, it's the public's business. So the public has a right to know. When you pass a city ordinance, that's your citizen city ordinance, right? So any records that are generated that are public business, the public gets to see them. This is all records unless they're expressly exempted. And this is the record of any public agency. So that means not just the council or commission, not just the city manager or the mayor or the city administrator. It also means your planning and zoning commission, your city clerk, your finance director, your code enforcement board. It means all aspects of city government are covered. In addition, the public agency can be any agency that receives at least 25% of its funding from a state or local entity. So your tourism commission is also covered. Oddly enough, in the definition of public agency, individual elected officials are your own little public agency for the purposes of the act. I mention this because if you have your own records as council member, commissioner, mayor, then someone could send you a request for records and say, hey, I want to see your email that you sent on X, Y, or Z date, and you're responsible for producing that. Don't panic. Your city clerk is going to help you. I haven't seen one yet turn anybody down, but it's important to note that you are ultimately responsible. Now, generally, when you're talking about the public records, it means everything. So it used to be pretty simple back in the day. You know, if you had a piece of paper and it was public record, then you knew that was it. And then these handy dandy little things showed up, and my entire life is on this phone. Sadly, this is my alarm clock. This is my camera. It's kind of everything. This phone runs my life. It's also subject to open records, right? Everything on there. I have my emails linked on there. Sometimes I will post on social media about official business. Anything that I do in my official capacity, if I am an elected official, that can be a public record. This includes your Facebook, your Twitter account, Instagram, Reddit. Anytime you are identifying yourself as a public official, that record can be subject to disclosure under the Open Records Act. And that's an important thing to note. Now, the good news is most of these online forums, they have record keeping. They keep a record of everything. But if you come to the City Officials Academy, we'll go a little deeper into social media and First Amendment and some other sticky situations there. So, but right now, just know that when we're talking about open records, we're not just talking about a file folder and a piece of paper. So who can request the records? Anyone can request the records. It doesn't matter if it's the city jerk, as JD identified, or you know, the pest that irritates everybody because they think the government's crooked and out to get him or her. It doesn't matter if they're suing you. I get that call a lot. We have this open records request for X, Y, or Z, but they're in a lawsuit. We don't have to give it to them, do we? Absolutely. If they've filed an open records request, you have to provide that document unless it's accepted. What about council members? Okay, so y'all heard what JD had to say. You have the power of one vote when you're convened as a council. So as an individual member of the legislative body, if you want that record, you have to file an open records request. or you can be required to. Now, if the council as a whole requests records, that's a different story. The council as a whole is entitled to public records in its role as the council. But as an individual, once the council has gone out of session, you're John Q. Public again, okay? And it's important to remember that.
Morgan, a quick question, a really good question here from Jennifer Jasper and Erlanger. She says, what if I post something on social media as a public official and later delete it? What if someone comments and I delete it?
Okay, so I'll just go over this really quickly because we can go down a huge rabbit hole on social media. But anything that you delete when you have posted in your official capacity as a member of the legislative body, keep a copy. Because if somebody requests later that you produce it, you're gonna have to produce it. The same thing if you delete anybody's comment. Take a screenshot, try to keep a copy. Again, the good news is on most of your social media sites, the primary Facebook, Twitter, they have an archive of it. So you could go back and request their official channels, but before you delete, well, a couple of things. The big rule, don't delete anything after 9 o'clock. On social media, nothing good happens after 9 o'clock. And y'all can laugh at me, but I'm just here to tell you. But just kind of keep that in mind. Just don't delete unless you've talked to your city attorney. So procedural requirements under the Act. The city clerk is the official custodian of city records. Okay, so all city records, city clerk's official custodian. This is by state law, state statute. In some cities, you will have a police clerk at the police department because you can imagine the volume of requests you get for 911 calls, police records. The city clerk is still ultimately responsible for proper production of those records. In some instances, we have suggested that mayors go ahead by executive order and identify the city police clerk as the custodian. That kind of helps clarify that role. However, the city clerk is still ultimately responsible by a statute. And we'll talk about ordinances. We can't amend the state statute by ordinance, but we do think the executive order helps. State law and city regulations govern the request, response, and appeal procedure. Every city is required to have a policy on how open records requests will be received. It has to have the process for accepting them, who they send it to, your business hours, that kind of thing. Almost every city does. One thing to note is email requests. A few years ago, the General Assembly included email as one of the methods by which an individual can submit an open records request if the city elects to allow it. So what that means is if your city has a general policy and it doesn't say exactly how it will receive the request by US mail or facsimile or hand delivery, then you're gonna have to accept email requests. If you specify and say we don't accept email requests, then the city doesn't have to accept it, okay? So it's important to know what your city's rules are and how those requests can be conducted. All cities have, or agencies have 3 days, three business days in which to respond. During the pandemic, that has been extended to 10 calendar days. And again, JD mentioned he and Brianna Carroll, our Director of Government Relations, they're going to be watching that like a hawk during the legislative session. So if that changes, they will be able to catch it and make sure that, you know, while we're struggling to do our business, to have people in City Hall, that doesn't get changed. And there's an appeal procedure. It goes to the Attorney General's office or the circuit court in the county in which the agency is located. Exceptions. There are a lot more exceptions. I think there are about 16 exceptions at this point. I'm only going to touch on 3 because these are the most prevalent exceptions that apply to our cities. One is certain personal information, my date of birth, my social security number. Now, jumping down to redactions really quickly, that doesn't mean that if somebody requests my personnel file and I'm a city employee, that we can just say you can't have it because that has her private information in there. The information has to be redacted. It has to be marked out so that it's not disclosed. But that is protected information, right? Certain preliminary documents. One of the primary preliminary documents that that you're going to deal with are meeting minutes. If I have a council meeting today and my clerk is taking the minutes, and then tomorrow somebody requests the meeting minutes, well, the council hasn't approved those minutes yet, or the commission. So those are not final. There could be an error. Maybe something, maybe it was important to clarify. Maybe somebody was misheard what you said. So the minutes are preliminary documents until they are officially approved by final action of the council in the next meeting. Before you get too tricky and think that you'll just, if you don't want to produce them, you just won't ever approve them. You can't really get away with that either. You have one meeting to approve those minutes, or they just become final. So your next meeting, take the action, review them, approve them, or if not, then they're final anyway. And then another exception that is common are ongoing law enforcement actions. Now, if a city is going to use this exception, the city has to explain how production of the record could cause harm under the Open Records Act. In a lot of instances, if the law enforcement action is going through prosecution, your Commonwealth attorney or your county attorney is going to get involved, and you'll get a letter or something from the prosecutor stating, we can't release that right now, it would harm prosecution. So these are the primary exceptions that we see out of cities with a lot of frequency. Okay, mayors, perk up. I know it's late, but it's important. There is a statutory requirement. You have to distribute information on open records and open meetings, and we have the Attorney General's website at the bottom. You have to distribute information on open records and open meetings and get a certified, signed receipt notice to all elected and appointed officials within 60 days of the start of their term or appointment. That means effective January 1, when everybody takes office, you're going to have 60 days from that date to get all your newly elected officials the information. Before you worry, we're going to send all this out, right? We'll send it out before that time is up. It is important to note also, however, that if you appoint a newly appointed official, so your police chief, you appoint your police chief in June, then you have 60 days from that appointment date to provide your police chief with this information. I'm not necessarily going to know that you hired your police chief and that you appointed this individual and got them through your council. So you're going to have to pay attention to that and make sure that all newly elected and appointed officials receive this information. All right. Do we have any other questions on open records? No, we're good. Okay, good. Ordinances. This is going to be one of your primary jobs, passing ordinances, deciding whether or not to take action. Ordinances are the laws of your city, set by the council, set by the commission, the board of commissioners. These are the rules. I always like to say, I'm kind of a live free or die kind of person, but I like to live in a city because I really, really like flush toilets and infrastructure and all of the, all of the things that living in a city in a social environment provide. So I agree to abide by the ordinances in the city of Lexington where I live. It's an official action of the legislative body, and they're enforceable under the authority of the state. So the state delegates its authority to local governments, okay, to say, hey, you're going to be able to pass your own ordinances and kind of, govern your own area. It's used to regulate conduct, appropriate funds. Your budget will be enacted by ordinance, establish compensation, so personnel, your compensation plan, annex territory, if y'all want to take over the world and expand, you're going to pass an ordinance, and when specifically required by state statute. Occasionally, something will go through the General Assembly and you're going to have to pass an ordinance. So, for example, if you want to do planning and zoning in your city, well, you're going to have to pass a statute and establish planning and zoning commission and board of adjustments to certain things that are required. There is a particular enactment procedure in state statute for ordinances. This is not complex. It has to be introduced by a member of the legislative body. That means in a mayor council form of government, the mayor cannot introduce the ordinance. He or she can look for a sponsor, a member of the legislative body who can introduce that ordinance that maybe they've drafted. It has to be in writing, okay? It has to relate to only one subject in its title. So we can't have an act related to a leash law and also include that you're going to change the speed limit out in front of my house tomorrow, right? It has to be one topic, and it has to contain an enacting clause, be it ordained by the city of blank. So what this means is when we're talking about how these are introduced, like I said, the mayor and a mayor council form of government cannot introduce it. A city manager cannot introduce it. A city attorney cannot introduce it. However, a mayor in a commission or in a city manager form of government can introduce legislation because they are a member of the Board of Commissioners in addition to the mayoral duties JD went over with y'all. The enactment procedure, to pass an ordinance, it has to be given 2 readings on 2 separate days unless it's an emergency. And don't get excited about the emergency provision because the emergency has to be verified by 2/3 majority vote of the council. And we're talking a real emergency, y'all. An emergency like a flood or the ice storm, or one common one, unfortunately, is the pump station in our city went out and we've got people without water. These are the types of emergencies that would allow you to bypass the 2 readings on 2 separate days. The first reading does not have to be one where a vote is taken. Now, most cities do take a vote for the first reading. It's more procedural. It may even be strategic. You may want to see, hey, does this thing have a chance? I'll go ahead and float it and see if I've got the votes to get it, through at least the first reading, but it's not mandatory. The only time a vote is mandatory is during the second reading for final passage, okay? And even then, it has to be approved by a majority of the quorum. So we're going to go back to math. If you have a 6-member council, majority is 4. We talked about that. So if you only have 4 people attending, how many people have to vote to pass the ordinance? You got 4 people in attendance, and that's your quorum. What's a majority?
3.
Thank you. 3. Yes. I know I don't do math either, but that's the only type of math I can do. I'm not getting into double digits. Okay. So even then, once it's passed by the majority, it is not final until it is published within 30 days after approval. Y'all are going to find out that your city clerks, your city managers, they know a ton of this procedural stuff, and you're going to love them because they know how to publish it. They know how to get it moving. Okay, do you have any questions about ordinances and how they're passed? All right, we're going to
give a quick definition of published.
Published is public. It's going to depend upon where you are and how large of a county you're in. Published generally means a published summary, unless it's your budget, in a newspaper of regional distribution in your area.
And that has to happen after it's passed?
Yes. Yes, in 30 days. There are some exceptions. If you are in a city, in a county with 80,000 or more, there are ways that you don't have to publish as much of your ordinance, but I don't want to get into the specifics. Come to our City Officials Academy. I know it's a blatant plug. I totally get it, but we can do.
Morgan, we did have a question in chat about sample ordinances that folks can use. This is from Malcolm Daniels and Ellesmere. So you might want to mention about that on our website.
Okay, we do have some sample ordinances on our website. If you go to klc.org, in our legal department, we do have offer some sample ordinances. You can also contact me, mpatterson@klc.org. And I can email you a sample ordinance, or if we don't have a sample, I can try to find one for you. So just give us a call, check out our website. So on to public purpose spending. This is an important role, okay? JD talked about how as a member of the legislative body, one of the primary roles is to pass the budget. The mayor or the city manager will kind of create and present to you a city budget. However, y'all are gonna have to decide, do we amend it? Do we pass it? What do we do? The Kentucky Constitution is very clear. Section 171, taxes shall be levied for public purpose only. This means you can't take city property and come grade my front yard that may need to be graded, which I say because my Christmas decoration, my bumble fell over. So it needs to be graded. But you can't do that, right? That's not a public purpose. Just because my front yard needs to be taken care of doesn't mean that the city can do me a solid. It has to be for a public purpose. This doesn't mean that an individual cannot benefit or an entity cannot benefit. It just means that the public good has to outweigh the benefit to the single individual or entity. So for example, economic development. This is a classic example of public purpose spending. City may say, you know what, we're going to sell this piece of property for below market value to this company. Okay, that doesn't seem like it's public purpose. We're giving them a big deal, right? But if that entity, if that business is going to bring jobs to the city that will improve public welfare, provide, both jobs for my citizens and a tax base for me as a city, then that's public benefit outweighs the benefit to that private individual. Okay, that's the kind of weighing that cities do. And in general, courts are going to defer to the city when they say, hey, look, here's why this is a public benefit. This doesn't mean you can go crazy with it, but generally they're going to defer if the city says this is what we want to do. Examine the intent. This is one of the times where intent is very important. Is the intent for private persons to benefit more than groups? Or is the benefit ultimately to the citizens of my city? So pop quiz, which law applies to your city? Are you a general bidding statute or are you local model procurement code? I can tell you part of what I was doing at first was writing down the cities, and I'm pretty sure we only have one local model procurement code city on here, and that was Owensboro. So most of y'all are under general bidding. The only real difference, local model procurement code has a little more structure. You have to open bids in public. You have to accept the lowest bid. There's some things that's just more structured with local model procurement code. General bidding is usually, I would say 90% of the time, a little more flexible and better for most smaller cities. So procurement requirements, generally, cities are going to have to advertise and solicit bids for purchases in excess of $30,000. This was increased from $20,000 a few years ago. I would encourage you to look at your city ordinances. A lot of city ordinances adopt the actual amount, and you may still have a restriction of $20,000 in your city ordinance. If you do, then I would recommend that you take that out and amend your ordinance just to say the maximum allowed by state law, just because we have some cities that have restricted themselves unnecessarily by adopting the actual dollar amount. Both laws have exceptions for professional services and emergency situations. Again, emergency means emergency. It doesn't mean, hey, there's this F-150 or F-250 down at the buy here, pay here lot downtown that could handle the snow plow that we need to attach to the front of it. It's not what that means. It means the pump station went down or something, a true emergency has occurred. Professional services, we are really talking about like your banking, insurance services. These do not have to be bid. Legal services, architectural services, engineering services, those are accepted from the bid requirements, okay? But regardless of whether you are bidding or what's happening, it's important for cities to realize how the annual budget is going to drive what they can spend and what you can't. So when we're talking about the budget, JD kind of referenced it earlier, once the legislative body passes it, the executive has a lot of authority to spend within those parameters. So now we're going to talk about that. Budgeting. Cities operate on a July 1 to June 30th fiscal year. The way it usually works, either the mayor or the city manager prepares and presents the budget to y'all with a message and an explanation of what all's in the budget, what funds, what the funds are doing, what it looks like. They're going to present that to you in June. That way you guys have time to look at it. This doesn't always happen, and there's no penalty if you don't get it in June. But cities must adopt a new budget each fiscal year by ordinance, and that's state law. The budget cannot have expenditures in excess of revenues. So you hear all the time about the general federal deficit and some of the struggles we go through with spending more than we take in as a country. The city doesn't have that luxury. You have to make sure you have a completely balanced budget. So the proposed budget is presented to the legislative body by the mayor and the mayor council and a city manager and city manager cities. Now, in a commission form of government, when you have the board of commissioners, everybody's going to be involved in the budget process. So that's going to be more of a collective, collaborative effort. Now, in reality, in a lot of the commission forms of government, the mayor will be the driving force, or if you have a city administrator, they will be a driving force in kind of collecting the majority of the information to put the budget together. But it's still more of a collaborative process, and each commissioner is going to provide a lot of information about their general area that they oversee, like the police commissioner or what have you. City funds can only be expended in accordance with the enacted city budget. So if I'm a mayor and you have given me X amount for the police, X amount for the fire, and X amount for administrative, well, if I'm running over on administrative, I can't just trap on over to the police and fire and take their money so that I'm okay over here in the administrative. I'm gonna have to go back and ask for an amendment to the budget so that I don't go over in administrative costs. Budget administration is the authority, the responsibility of the city's executive authority. So your mayor and mayor council, city manager and city manager. If y'all are elected for a city administrator, they're going to manage it frequently, but ultimately the board of commissioners, the mayor and the mayor council, they're going to be responsible for how money is spent. And failure to comply with the budget ordinance can have some big consequences. And that is one of the things to look out for. It can be a violation of your ethics ordinance. There can be some pretty significant consequences, okay? Okay, ethics. Each city is required by law to have an ethics ordinance. Y'all all do. It may not have been updated since 1994, but you have it, okay? It has to include standards of conduct, financial disclosure statements, a requirement that they be provided by officials and candidates that are elected to office, probably already done this, a nepotism policy. Now, the nepotism policy can say, we love nepotism. Not really, nobody has that. However, it can be a general statement on nepotism, right? The reason there's no requirement to restrict nepotism is, I like to use my family as an example. I'm from Lyon County. My family is an original land grant family, meaning we've been here forever. I'm related to half the county. you put too much of a stringent nepotism policy in there and half the county will be unemployed, right? That's just kind of the way it works in smaller towns and smaller areas. So if you're in a small town, we have always kind of recommended just pay attention to your nepotism policy. Don't make it too restrictive so you don't end up in a situation where people are either inadvertently violating it or you have somebody elected to council and half your government, your city employees have to be terminated. It has to be a designation of an enforcement body or an officer. So either an ethics board that can investigate and hear any complaints of ethics violations, or an individual officer that's given that responsibility. In smaller cities, they may not be able to get enough people to have a full ethics board. And in that situation, we're going to recommend that they give that duty to an officer. And the ordinance may also specify that it applies to appointed officials and employees, and we recommend following that process. A commonly missed kind of statute is a general prohibition against contracting with the city. The reason I say commonly missed, because this applies to not just elected officials, it applies to employees, it applies to your planning and zoning commission, it applies to a lot of elected officials. So what happens here is it's a bar against any oral or written contract with the city unless certain disclosures are made. So it's not contracts awarded by bid. It's not if you have a pre-existing contract with the city before you were elected or employed. It just means that while you are an official or an employee or a board member, commission, what have you, you're prohibited from engaging in business with the city unless proper disclosures are made during a meeting. This means that at an open meeting of the legislative body, on the record, the official or employee discloses their interest in a contract. So I have a mowing service and the city's asked me to mow. Here's why I want to provide the service to the city. And then on the record, the legislative body says, we want her to continue mowing for the city because she's reliable. We know she does good work, right? Make those findings of fact on the record and determine that it's in the public's best interest to move forward with that contract. In some smaller cities, one of your commissioners or your council members may be the only person who can perform a certain function within the city. In that instance, all you have to do is go through this process. If you don't go through the process and the contract's challenged, it's a Class A misdemeanor. The employee can lose their job. The commissioner could be charged with a Class A misdemeanor for violating that provision of the ordinance or of the state statute. So it's just an important thing to keep in mind. Okay, y'all, we're here. We're at the end. To sum up, know your roles. We all have to know our roles and limits on powers and authorities in your form of government. Avoid costly litigation when it comes to personnel by conferring with informed attorneys and personnel changes. Meetings and public records have to be open and accessible to the public with limited exceptions. Public funds have to be spent for public purposes. And cities operate on an annual budget that covers July 1 through June 30th, their fiscal year, and expenditure of funds must conform with that budget ordinance. And finally, be familiar with your city's ethics ordinances so you don't violate the law. And then ultimately, come see us at the City Officials Academy. You get our new City Officials Legal Handbook before anybody else does, hot off the presses, and we would love to see you there.
Morgan, we did have a question pop up about budget. That is, can each department move money around in their budget?
Okay, so there are general budgets where it's not strictly line itemed. Like, so the legislative body may not say, we're going to give this much money for some new cars, and we're going to give this much money for, you know, your utilities and this much money for your salaries. It may be more general and say, for police, we're going to give you this much money. If that's the case, then yeah, they can move that money around. If the legislative body decides and has presented in its budget ordinance a very strict line item budget, then the agency doesn't have that authority to move money around. And while it might seem like a good idea to do that, hamstringing an individual department in some instances can lead to some pretty significant dysfunction within that department. So y'all do kind of how you feel, and just, you know, your cities, you know what you need, and yeah, the budgets will kind of be what they have to be. I hate to be so general. I sound like a 13-year-old, but there you go.
Well, Morgan, thank you very much, and you may hit the quit screen sharing as we wrap up. I don't think I can do that, but that concludes a really quick view of laws that you might want to be familiar with before you go into office. Mayor Miller from Stanford had asked a question about newspaper publication, and the law hadn't changed, except unless you're in one of these cities located in a county over 90,000. So a lot of their Northern Kentucky folks, they don't have to publish in the newspaper anymore. They can post their notices on their own city website and do a display advertisement. But your question about what are we doing in terms of law changes where small local newspapers are going out that carry newspaper advertisements, we're trying to get that extended to all cities in Kentucky, to where you can use your own website and just post a small advertisement rather than publishing your whole budget, your whole audit, ordinance summaries. It saves you money, saves your taxpayers money at the end of the day, and also honestly a little more transparent than putting it in the newspaper, where people might just stumble on it if they happen to see it, especially where subscriptions are down. So it is part of our legislative agenda for this 2021 session to get that extended to all Kentucky cities. There are about 145 cities in Kentucky that don't have to do it, that are located in a county with a population greater than 90,000. So that really highlights, I'm glad you asked that question. We got all these laws, but part of our job at the league is to listen to you all on what needs to be changed. And in January, when the legislature comes, we go try to change them for you. So hopefully you'll stay engaged in that process. It is a privilege to virtually meet all of you all. I sure hope that I wish you good luck getting your oath of office. And we really do mean it when we say call right anytime. We hope to see you again soon. And please take care and have a safe holidays and Merry Christmas, whatever holiday you celebrate, and a great new year. Good to see all of you.
How do I go about getting a KLC rule book? Can I purchase it online?
Yeah, Mr. Frost, these won't be out until, this is the legal handbook. Is that what you're talking about, right?
Yes, sir.
Those will be online probably around the end of January. I may let Morgan, she probably knows the dates better than me. Let me not act like I know it all. Morgan?
Well, since I made it up, yes, January 27th, they will be available online for purchase.
Okay.
And when it comes to our City Officials Academy, from the 19th through the 26th, we'll kind of get a first bite at ordering the books online.
19th through the 21st.
Yeah, I was.
Well,
19th through the 21st. It won't last a week.
No, but I'm sorry. The City Officials Academy is the 19th through the 21st. However, the webpage doesn't go live until the 27th. So that's what I meant. Sorry, y'all.
All right. Thank you all.
Yep. Thank you all. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Good night, guys. Thank you.